Welcome to Nightshift Horror. Before we check in tonight, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now get comfortable. The night shift is about to begin.
Story 1. The Intake Interview. I found my own handwriting documenting a conversation I was certain I'd never finished. The intake process at Whitmore Psychiatric had a rhythm I'd come to trust. Clipboard in hand, blue pen clicked once, door held open with my foot while I scanned the waiting area. Tuesday evening, 7:15. My third admission of the day. The man sat in chair 4, always chair 4, the one beneath the flickering fluorescent that maintenance kept promising to replace. Mid-50s, clean-shaven, wearing a gray cardigan that looked expensive. His hands rested flat on his thighs, fingers spread evenly. No fidgeting, no smartphone, just patient stillness. "Mr. Brennan?" I called, matching his name to the referral sheet. He stood without hesitation, following me down the corridor to interview room C. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet. I gestured to the chair across from mine, setting my clipboard on the desk between us. "I'm Dr. Calloway," I began, my standard introduction delivered with practiced warmth. "I'll be conducting your initial psychiatric evaluation," he finished, his voice measured and polite. "Yes, of course. Shall we begin with identifying information?" I paused, pen hovering. Patience interrupting wasn't unusual. Anxiety often manifested as nervous chatter, but his tone carried no anxiety, just courtesy. "Right," I continued, recovering smoothly. "Full name, date of birth, and current? Thomas Arthur Brennan, March 14th, 1971. Currently residing at 447 Oakmont Drive, though I expect that's temporary." He smiled gently. "You were going to ask about living arrangements next." My pen stilled against the paper. The form's questions did follow that exact sequence, a template I'd used hundreds of times. Coincidence, pattern recognition. Patients sometimes anticipated clinical structure. "Have you been through this process before, Mr. Brennan?" "Not exactly." He tilted his head slightly. "But I understand the framework. You're wondering about previous psychiatric history now. Hospitalizations, medications, family mental health background." I set my pen down deliberately, folding my hands. "Mr. Brennan, it would be helpful if you'd let me ask the questions in my own time." "Of course, my apologies, Emily." The room's temperature seemed to drop. I hadn't introduced myself by first name. The intake form bore only my credentials. Dr. E. Calloway, PGY3. Professional distance was protocol. "I prefer Dr. Calloway," I said, keeping my voice level. "Certainly." He nodded, that same patient expression unchanged. "You were 7 when your family's dog died, a golden retriever named Samson. Your father buried him in the backyard, and you insisted on putting your favorite hair ribbon in the grave, purple with small white flowers embroidered along the edge." My throat constricted. Samson had been dead for 23 years. I'd never told anyone about the ribbon. Not partners, not friends, not my own therapist during training. It was a private grief, a child's ritual I'd half forgotten until this moment brought it rushing back with uncomfortable clarity. "How do you know that?" The clinical distance I'd maintained cracked slightly. "You wore your mother's reading glasses to your college graduation because you'd lost your own the night before. You walked across that stage squinting, convinced everyone could tell they were too large for your face. No one noticed. Your mother cried through the entire ceremony." My hands had gone cold. These weren't facts accessible through any database. These were memories stored only in my own mind, small and inconsequential enough that I'd never shared them. Not even in those late-night conversations during residency when exhausted colleagues traded childhood stories over cold coffee. Who told you these things? I asked, though I already knew no one could have. You did, eventually. Mr. Brennan's expression remained calm, almost sympathetic. Not today, of course, but you will. These conversations have a way of circling back. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against linoleum. I'm going to consult with my attending. Please wait here. He nodded agreeably, settling back as though he had all the time in the world. The hallway felt too bright after the dim interview room. I walked quickly toward the resident's office, my heart performing an irregular rhythm that my medical training couldn't quite dismiss as mere anxiety. Dr. Rashid, my supervising attending, looked up from his computer as I entered. Problem with the intake? He asked, noting my expression. The patient, Mr. Brennan, he's demonstrating some unusual knowledge, personal information he shouldn't have access to. Dr. Rashid frowned, pulling up the referral on his screen. Thomas Brennan, voluntary admission, referred by his primary care physician for evaluation of possible delusional disorder. History of making claims about temporal disorientation. No documented violence, no substance use. He glanced at me. What kind of personal information? How could I explain that a stranger knew about a childhood dog, about borrowed glasses, about private moments that existed nowhere but in my own recall? Childhood memories, I said carefully. Specific details that aren't in any record. Classic presentation of delusional incorporation, Dr. Rashid replied, his tone shifting into teaching mode. Patients with elaborate delusional systems sometimes make broad statements that feel specific due to confirmation bias. He likely said something vague that you're pattern matching to your own experience. I wanted to agree. Confirmation bias was real, a trap even trained clinicians fell into. But the details, the purple ribbon with embroidered flowers, my mother's oversized reading glasses, those weren't vague suggestions. They were precise. Finish the intake, Dr. Rashid continued. Document his claims carefully. If he's demonstrating organized delusions, we'll need to assess for schizophrenia spectrum versus delusional disorder. I nodded, returning to interview room C with deliberate professional composure. Mr. Brennan hadn't moved. He looked up as I entered, that same gentle patience in his eyes. Shall we continue? He asked. I sat, retrieving my clipboard. Mr. Brennan, I need to ask directly. Where did you obtain personal information about me? I didn't obtain it. You shared it. He paused, considering his words. Or rather, you will share it. Time doesn't move quite the way we assume, Dr. Calloway. Conversations layer. Sometimes we're on both sides simultaneously. Textbook presentation, I thought, even as unease prickled along my spine. Organized delusion with temporal disorientation themes. I see, I said, making notes. And how long have you experienced this temporal layering? Since I started forgetting which role I was playing. His eyes met mine with unsettling clarity. It becomes difficult after enough rotations to remember which side of the desk you started on. I wrote faster, documenting his statements word for word. Psychiatric training emphasized careful observation, noting exact phrasing for later analysis. But his words burrowed beneath my clinical detachment, touching something I couldn't quite name. We'll continue this evaluation tomorrow, I said, standing. I'm recommending voluntary inpatient admission for further assessment. Of course. He stood as well, buttoning his cardigan with unhurried precision. You'll want to review your notes tonight. You always do. You're thorough that way. But be careful when you read them back, Emily. Sometimes we write things we don't remember writing. I completed the admission paperwork at 11:40 p.m., my handwriting cramped from fatigue. Mr. Brennan had been settled in the voluntary unit without incident, accepting his room assignment with that same unsettling calm. Back in the resident's office, I pulled his intake form from my bag, intending to transcribe my handwritten notes into the electronic record. The clipboard fell from my hands. The form was complete, every section filled in my handwriting, but with details I hadn't written. Full psychiatric history spanning 2 pages, family background, previous medications. And at the bottom, in the section marked Clinical Impressions, a paragraph I absolutely had not composed. Patient demonstrates organized insight into evaluator's personal history, suggesting information obtained through means currently unclear. Recommend careful assessment of boundary dissolution between interviewer and subject. Notable: patient's temporal disorientation claims may warrant investigation beyond standard delusional framework. Evaluator notes: personal memory intrusion during interview. Purple ribbon, borrowed glasses. Information pathway unknown. Further sessions required to determine if phenomenon is isolated to this patient or indicative of broader perceptual concerns. The handwriting was unmistakably mine, the same slight rightward slant, the way my lowercase a never quite closed at the top. But the words, the clinical distance used to describe my own experience as though I were the observed rather than the observer. I checked the timestamp on my phone's photos. I'd photographed the blank form before entering the interview room. A habit from my intern year when I'd once lost an entire intake packet. The image showed an empty clipboard, questions waiting to be asked. Now those questions had been answered in my own hand, documenting a conversation I couldn't fully remember completing. From somewhere down the dark hallway, I heard the voluntary unit door unlock with its characteristic electronic click. 3:11 a.m. according to the wall clock. Visiting hours were long over. All residents had badge access, but I was alone in the office. I looked back at the intake form, at that final line in the clinical impressions section, words I hadn't written but recognized nonetheless. Some evaluations, it read in my careful script, conclude before they begin. Others never finish at all. And beneath that, added in fresher ink, see patient file for continuation. Your handwriting will be waiting. Story 2, the locked unit door. The security footage showed me entering the locked ward at 3:11 a.m., but I was asleep in my apartment 3 miles away. At least I thought I was. Whitmore Psychiatric's secure unit operated on a simple principle: controlled access, documented entry, no exceptions. The main door required a 6-digit code known only to attending physicians, senior residents, and designated nursing staff. The code changed monthly, distributed via encrypted email to authorized personnel only. I'd worked the unit for 8 months without a single security incident. Until the morning I arrived for rounds and found the night shift nurse, Patricia Hollis, staring at the access log with an expression I'd learned to associate with medication errors or missing patients. "Problem?" I asked, setting my coffee on the nurse's station counter. Patricia looked up, her 40 years of psychiatric nursing evident in the measured way she chose her words. "The door's been unlocking itself. 3rd night in a row, always at 3:11 a.m. Logs show badge access, but..." She turned the monitor toward me. "Look at the user ID, my employee number, my badge code, time-stamped 03/11/47, 3 nights running." "I was home asleep," I said immediately, the defensiveness in my voice surprising me. "My badge has been in my wallet." "I know." Patricia's tone carried no accusation, just weary confusion. "I've worked nights for 6 years. I know the sound of that door, the electronic click, the pneumatic hiss when it unseals. I heard it all 3 nights. But when I checked, the hallway was empty. No one entering or leaving. I pulled the access log closer, scanning the entries. The pattern was unmistakable. Every door access during regular hours showed a corresponding exit scan within minutes or hours. But these 311 entries had no matching exits. According to the system, I was entering the secure unit in the middle of the night and never leaving. Could be a system glitch, I offered, though I'd learned during residency that unexplained technical failures usually had mundane causes. Dead batteries, magnetic interference, user error. That's what I told myself the first night. Patricia pulled up a different screen. But then I checked the security cameras. The security office occupied a windowless room adjacent to the administrative wing, monitored by a rotating crew who spent their shifts watching grainy feeds from 47 cameras distributed throughout the facility. Marcus Webb, the day shift security supervisor, was a former corrections officer who treated every policy violation with the seriousness of a federal crime. He pulled up the footage without comment, his thick fingers surprisingly deft on the keyboard. The timestamp read 03:11:35, 12 seconds before my badge code registered at the secure unit door. The hallway appeared empty, the fisheye lens distorting the corridor into a stretched tunnel of fluorescent light and white walls. Nothing moved. Then at 03:11:47, the door opened inward, the familiar electronic click Patricia had described, and a figure stepped through. I leaned closer to the monitor, my breath catching. The woman on the screen wore my face. Same height, same build, same dark hair pulled into the practical ponytail I'd adopted during intern year. But something was wrong with the proportions. Her shoulders were slightly more hunched, her movements fractionally slower, her hair threaded with gray that I didn't yet have. "That's not me," I said, hearing the uncertainty in my own voice. Marcus rewound the footage, playing it again. This time I focused on the details. The ID badge clipped to her white coat, my name clearly visible even in the grainy playback. The way she moved through the door with familiar confidence, someone who'd walked that hallway countless times. She turned her head briefly toward the camera, and I saw my own face aged perhaps 10 years. Lines around the eyes, a tightness to the jaw that spoke of accumulated stress. "First night," Marcus said, advancing to the next saved file. "Here's night 2. The second clip showed the same scene. 3:11 a.m., the door unlocking, a figure entering. But this version of me appeared older still. The gray in her hair had spread, her gait carried a subtle stiffness, and when she glanced at the camera, the face reflected back looked haggard in a way I associated with colleagues nearing retirement rather than mid-residency. "And last night," Marcus continued, pulling up the third file, "I didn't want to watch. Some instinct I'd learned to trust during psychiatric training, the same instinct that warned me away from patients whose delusions carried a particular intensity, was screaming that I should leave this office, dismiss the footage as an elaborate prank, return to the comfortable rationality of morning rounds. But I watched. The third figure moved with pronounced difficulty, one hand trailing along the wall for support. Her hair was predominantly gray, her posture curved by years I hadn't lived. She paused just inside the doorway, facing the camera directly, and for 3 eternal seconds, I stared at my own face, aged perhaps 30 years, hollow cheeks, deep-set eyes, an expression of profound exhaustion mixed with something else I couldn't name. Resignation? Recognition? Then she continued down the hallway, disappearing beyond the camera's range. "I pulled footage from all the interior cameras," Marcus said, his professional composure cracking slightly. "She doesn't show up anywhere else. Just that one hallway, entering through that one door. No corresponding exit, no appearance in any patient rooms or common areas. It's like she walks through that door and ceases to exist." I canceled my morning rounds, citing a personal emergency that wasn't entirely false. Instead, I spent the day reviewing the secure unit's physical layout, looking for logical explanations. Blind spots in camera coverage, maintenance access points, anything that might explain how someone wearing my face could enter the ward and vanish. The unit occupied the entire third floor, a rectangular space with patient rooms lining the outer walls and common areas, nursing stations and offices forming the interior core. The main entrance where the mysterious entries occurred was the only point of access. Fire exits existed, but they were alarmed and would have triggered immediate security response. I interviewed Patricia during her break, asking her to describe exactly what she'd heard each night. "The door click at 3:11, she said, stirring her coffee in the break room. Then silence. "I always check. It's protocol when the door opens during night hours, but the hallway's empty, just that feeling you get sometimes, you know? Like someone's just left a room, and the air still holds their shape. Has anything else unusual happened? Patient disturbances, missing items, anything at all?" Patricia considered this carefully. "Room 347 has been strange. It's unoccupied. Has been since Mr. Chen discharged 3 weeks ago. But sometimes in the morning the bed looks disturbed, like someone's been lying on it. And once I found a hair on the pillow." She paused. "A gray hair. We don't have any elderly patients on the unit right now." Room 347 was directly down the hallway from the main entrance, exactly where the security footage showed the aged figures walking. I requested access to the secure unit's records from the past decade, claiming I was researching long-term patient outcomes for a presentation. The archives revealed something I hadn't expected. I wasn't the first resident to experience phantom entries. 5 years earlier, a psychiatry resident named Allison Grant had reported similar incidents. Her badge code appearing in access logs during hours she wasn't on duty. Security footage showing figures the cameras couldn't quite capture clearly. The incidents had been attributed to technical failures, and Dr. Grant had completed her residency without further incident. I found her contact information through the alumni directory and called during my lunch break. "I remember those glitches," Dr. Grant said, her voice carrying over the phone with professional friendliness. "Freaked me out at the time, but the IT department eventually fixed whatever was causing the phantom log entries." "Did you ever see yourself on the security footage?" I asked. A long pause. "What do you mean?" "The cameras. Did you ever review the recordings from when your badge code appeared?" Yes, once. But the footage was corrupted or something, just static and shadows." Another pause, longer this time. "Why? What did you see?" I described the 3 nights of footage, the aging versions of myself entering the unit and disappearing. Dr. Grant's breathing had changed, coming slightly faster over the connection. "I need to tell you something. After I left Whitmore, I had recurring dreams for months. Always the same scenario. I was back on the unit, walking that hallway late at night, but I was old. Decades older, and I was looking for something, a patient, or a room, or myself. I'd wake up exhausted, like I'd actually been there." Her voice dropped. "Last year, those dreams stopped, but sometimes I still wake up at 3:11 a.m., and I have this absolute certainty that somewhere in some version of that hallway, I'm still walking." Night 4, I stayed late. Not officially. I'd signed out at my usual time, but I returned to the hospital at 2:30 a.m., parking in the visitor's lot and entering through the emergency department where no one questioned a white coat moving with purpose. I positioned myself in the hallway adjacent to the secure unit entrance, hidden in the recessed doorway of a storage closet. My phone showed Oro 3:09, 2 minutes. The hospital's night sounds surrounded me, the distant beep of monitors, hushed conversations from the nurses' station around the corner, the elevator's mechanical hum. My heart was performing that irregular rhythm again, the one I kept telling myself was just stress. 3:11. The hallway remained empty. 3:11:30, nothing. Perhaps it was over. Perhaps whatever phenomenon had caused the anomalous entries had run its course. 3:11:247. The electronic click echoed through the quiet corridor, painfully loud, unmistakable. The secure unit door swung inward, the pneumatic seal releasing with its characteristic hiss, and she stepped through. I saw myself, but not as I existed in this moment. This version moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had begun to betray them, whose joints ached, whose breath came slightly labored. Her hair was more gray than dark, pulled back in the same ponytail style I'd worn since intern year. The ID badge clipped to her white coat bore my name, but the photo showed the older face now turning slowly in my direction. She saw me. We stared at each other across perhaps 15 feet of fluorescent-lit hallway. Two versions of the same woman, separated by decades that one of us had lived and the other hadn't yet experienced. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. Then she raised her hand, the same hand I'd raised unconsciously in mirror response, and waved. Not a greeting, a goodbye, or a warning. She turned and continued down the hallway toward room 347, her footsteps making no sound on the linoleum floor. I rushed forward, crossing the distance in seconds, but when I reached the secure unit door, it was closed, sealed, the electronic lock showing red. Unauthorized access. I pressed my face to the door's narrow window, looking down the interior hallway. Empty. The next morning, I reviewed the night's security footage with Marcus. The timestamp showed 03:11:47, the door opening, a figure entering. But this time, the camera captured two people in frame, the older version of me walking through the door, and myself visible in the corridor's edge, stepping forward with my hand raised. "When did you enter the unit?" Marcus asked, confusion evident in his voice. "I didn't. I was outside watching through the door window. But the camera shows you on both sides." He rewound the footage. "Here you are entering, and here you are, already inside? That's impossible. The door was closed." I watched my own image on the monitor, the current me frozen in grainy digital capture. Standing in a hallway I couldn't have accessed without triggering every security protocol. The timestamp was precise. 03:11:51. 4 seconds after the older version had entered. 4 seconds that I'd spent on the wrong side of a locked door, yet somehow appeared inside. "I'm requesting an immediate badge deactivation," I told Marcus, my voice steadier than I felt. "Change the secure unit codes. I need to be removed from all access lists." "Dr. Calloway, I'm not sure that's—" "Do it today, please." They changed the codes that afternoon. My badge was deactivated and replaced. The secure unit's access protocols were updated, my employee number scrubbed from all authorization lists. That night, I stayed in my apartment, doors locked, phone within reach. At 03:11 a.m., I was awake, sitting on my couch with every light burning. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered against every instinct. "Emily?" The voice was mine, but aged, roughened by years of late shifts and accumulated exhaustion. "Stop trying to lock me out. That door doesn't work the way you think. None of them do." "Who is this?" A sound that might have been laughter, sad and knowing. "You already know. You've seen me walking that hallway for 4 nights now. Eventually you'll understand, we're not haunting the unit, we're stuck in it. Every late shift, every 3 a.m. emergency, every time we convinced ourselves we were leaving but stayed just 1 more hour. They pile up, Emily. The versions of ourselves we leave behind when we're too tired to carry them forward. That's not possible. You're a psychiatrist. You know better than most. The line between what's real and what we experience as real is thinner than we admit. I walked through that door tonight. So did you. You just don't remember yet." The call disconnected. I took a leave of absence the following week, citing burnout. Dr. Rashid approved it immediately, concern evident in his expression. "Take the time you need," he said. "This work extracts a toll we don't always see coming." 3 months later, I returned to a different rotation, outpatient clinic, day shifts only, nowhere near the secure unit. But sometimes at 03:11 a.m. I wake in my apartment and find myself standing at my door, keys in hand, dressed in my white coat that I'd stored in the back of my closet. I have no memory of putting it on. And once, checking my phone's photo roll after one of these episodes, I found an image I hadn't taken. The secure unit hallway, empty except for a figure in the distance, grainy and out of focus, but unmistakably wearing my face. The timestamp read 3/11/47. The date was 30 years in the future. I deleted it immediately, but sometimes I wonder when I'm old and gray and still somehow walking hospital corridors at 3 in the morning. Will I remember the door? Will I recognize the younger version of myself standing on the other side, watching with the same confused horror I felt that fourth night? And will I raise my hand to wave or to warn her that some doors don't close no matter how many codes we change? Story 3. The Case of Patient 47. The badge in his possession bore my face, my name, and a date that wouldn't arrive for another decade. Patient 47, admitted Monday morning following a welfare check requested by neighbors who'd noticed increasingly erratic behavior, sat across from me with the bemused patience of someone tolerating an uncomfortable situation. His intake paperwork listed his name as Dr. Marcus Lindholm, age 53, former psychiatrist, currently unemployed and estranged from family. The delusion presented clearly within our first 5 minutes. "I appreciate your patience, Emily," he said, settling into the interview chair with practiced ease. "I know this role reversal must feel strange, but given the circumstances, it's probably for the best that you conduct this evaluation rather than me." I kept my expression neutral, making notes on my tablet. Patients with professional backgrounds sometimes incorporated their training into elaborate delusional systems. Doctors believing they were treating their treaters, lawyers convinced they were defending themselves in invisible courts. "Mr. Lindholm, I understand you previously worked in psychiatry?" "Dr. Lindholm," he corrected gently, the way a mentor might redirect a junior colleague. "And I still work in psychiatry, technically. Or I did until last week's incident." He paused, studying me with an intensity that felt uncomfortably familiar. "You don't remember yet? That's to be expected. You're earlier in the timeline, but I've been your supervisor for 6 years, Emily. Well, from my perspective, I imagine from yours we've just met." Classic presentation, I noted. Elaborate delusional framework with temporal disorientation themes, incorporating real people into false narrative. History suggests professional decline following onset. "Tell me about your work," I said, employing the standard technique of allowing delusional patients to articulate their belief systems fully before gently challenging them. Dr. Lindholm leaned forward, his manner shifting into what I recognized as teaching mode, that particular combination of authority and encouragement that attendings use during supervision. "Your clinical instincts are excellent, but you're tentative with diagnostic conclusions. You second-guess yourself, particularly with personality disorder cases. We've been working on that." He smiled. "You presented that fascinating case last month. The patient with dissociative identity disorder who showed different handwriting samples for each alter? Your differential was textbook, but you needed 3 supervision sessions before you trusted your own assessment." I kept my pen moving, documenting his statements, even as something cold settled in my chest. I had evaluated a DID patient recently. The handwriting variations had been remarkable, and I'd spent weeks uncertain about my diagnostic conclusions before Dr. Rashid had validated my assessment. But Dr. Lindholm couldn't know that. Patient confidentiality meant those case discussions occurred in closed supervision sessions, never in public forums where someone could overhear. "How do you know about that case?" I asked, watching his expression carefully. "Because you presented it during our Tuesday afternoon supervision. You always bring coffee, 2 creams, 1 sugar. And you've worn that same blazer to every session for the past month because it has pockets deep enough for your reference cards." He gestured toward my jacket, which did indeed contain the index cards I'd prepared for today's interviews. "Mr. Lindholm, Marcus, please. You've been calling me Marcus since your 2nd year." I stood, maintaining professional composure. "I'm going to review your belongings that were logged during admission. Sometimes examining personal items helps us understand—" "3rd drawer from the top in the nurse's station desk," he interrupted. "Clear plastic bag, labeled with my name and admission date. You'll find my wallet, keys, phone, and my hospital badge. Be careful with that one, Emily. It tends to raise questions." The bag was exactly where he'd described. Standard protocol placed patient belongings in secured storage, but items held for processing during admission were temporarily kept at the nurse's station. I signed for the bag and took it to the empty consult room down the hall. Wallet, California driver's license for Marcus Lindholm, current address matching the intake form. Credit cards, $43 cash, a coffee shop loyalty card punched 9 times, keys, house key, car key, mailbox key. Nothing unusual. Phone, older model smartphone, password protected, and a hospital badge. My hand steadied through sheer professional training as I removed it from the bag. The badge was authentic, the same design Whitmore Psychiatric used, complete with embedded security chip and barcode. The photo showed a woman I recognized immediately, my own face, but older. Early 40s, perhaps, with subtle lines around the eyes and a professional wariness in the expression. The name read, Dr. Emily Calloway, MD, attending psychiatrist. The issue date was printed in small text at the bottom, August 2034, 10 years from now. I checked the bag again, searching for signs of forgery or manipulation. But the badge felt authentic, the right weight, the proper lamination, the security features that would be nearly impossible to replicate without institutional access. My phone showed 2024. The badge showed 2034, and the patient in interview room 2 claimed to be my supervisor from a future that hadn't arrived. I returned to Dr. Lindholm's room, the badge still in my hand. He looked up as I entered, unsurprised. "Found it, I see. This is an elaborate fake." I set it on the table between us, needing him to acknowledge the impossibility. "Is it?" He picked up the badge, turning it over with familiar handling. "Run it through the security scanner if you'd like. The chip is active. Well, active for another 10 years at least. After that," he shrugged, "technology changes, but for now it's as real as yours. Explain how you have a hospital badge issued in 2034. Because I took it from your office last week, or rather last week from my perspective, March 2034. You'd left it on your desk after running down to the pharmacy, and I knew I'd need it. Proof for when this conversation happened, though I suspected you might not believe it even with evidence." I sat down, my training warring with the visceral wrongness of holding my own future ID. "This isn't possible. Temporal consistency is less rigid than we assume." Dr. Lindholm spoke with the calm authority of someone discussing established fact. "Particularly in places like this, psychiatric facilities carry a weight. All that concentrated distress, all those fractured perceptions of reality. It creates thin spaces where timelines blur. You'll understand better in about 6 years." When you start noticing the same patients appearing in your office with conditions you haven't diagnosed yet. This is a delusion, Mr. Lindholm. Dr. Lindholm, he corrected again, that patient teaching tone returning. And it is a delusion in a sense. We're both experiencing discontinuous reality. You because your future hasn't happened yet, me because my present has already occurred. From a certain perspective, the only difference between us is direction. He leaned back, his expression softening. I'm sorry this is happening now, Emily. You're not ready for it. But the timeline doesn't wait for readiness. In 3 years, you'll be promoted to attending. In 6, you'll begin supervising residents and notice the temporal anomalies I'm describing. In 10, you'll stand in your office and realize your badge is missing, and you'll know exactly where it went. I contacted hospital security requesting they scan Dr. Lindholm's badge through their system. The scan returned active, registered to Dr. Emily Calloway, attending physician with full access privileges to all psychiatric units. Issue date, August 2034. System error, the security supervisor told me over the phone. Date must be logged wrong, probably meant 2024 and someone transposed the numbers. But the badge showed no signs of age, no wear on the edges, no fading of the photo, no scratches on the laminate. It looked freshly issued because in its own timeline it had been. I completed Dr. Lindholm's evaluation documenting his elaborate delusional system and recommending inpatient treatment for stabilization and medication adjustment. He accepted the recommendations with the same bemused patience he'd shown throughout our interview. You're following protocol, he said as I prepared to leave. It's what I would have advised in your position. Take care of yourself, Emily. The next few years are difficult, but you navigate them well, obviously. He gestured toward the badge still in my pocket. Keep that safe. You'll need to return it eventually. It's evidence of your delusional framework, I said. It stays in your chart. As you prefer. Though I suspect you'll find it in your pocket again before long, these objects have a way of staying where they're needed. I locked the badge in my desk drawer that evening, filing the incident report with security and completing my clinical notes. Dr. Lindholm's delusion was elaborate but manageable. With proper medication and therapy, his temporal disorientation should resolve. The next morning, my desk drawer was still locked. The badge was gone. I found it 3 hours later in my white coat pocket, the same pocket where I kept my own current badge. They rested side by side, the 2024 and 2034 versions of the same credential, the same face aging subtly between them. I returned the future badge to my locked drawer. By evening, it was back in my pocket. After the 4th migration, I stopped trying to secure it. The badge moved according to rules I didn't understand, appearing in my possession whenever I left it elsewhere. Eventually, I bought a separate badge holder and carried both, the present and the future, side by side. Dr. Lindholm was discharged after 2 weeks of treatment. His delusions unchanged, but his functioning stabilized. Before he left, he stopped by the resident's office. The badge will stay with you now, he said, until August 2034, when you'll leave it on your desk and I'll take it, completing the loop. Time's funny that way. It only moves forward, but sometimes forward loops back to meet itself. He walked out and I never saw him again. But sometimes during supervision sessions with my current attending, I catch myself explaining things I haven't learned yet, techniques I shouldn't know. Insights that feel borrowed from experience I haven't accumulated. And in my wallet beneath my current hospital badge, the future version waits patiently. A credential from a timeline I'm walking toward whether I believe in it or not. 10 years from now, I'll leave it on my desk. And somewhere, somehow, a patient I've already met will take it, carrying proof that some loops close regardless of whether we understand their shape. Story 4. The Observation Logs. My handwriting filled the observation log with entries I'd never written, each one growing more desperate than the last. Observation rounds on Whitmore's psychiatric inpatient unit followed a strict protocol. Every hour, a clinician or nurse documented each patient's status, behavior, affect, vital signs if indicated any notable changes. The logs formed a chronological narrative of each patient's hospital course, providing data for treatment adjustments and legal documentation of care provided. I'd always found comfort in the routine. During overnight shifts, when the ward settled into uneasy quiet and the fluorescent lights hummed their eternal monotone, the observation logs anchored me to something concrete. Clipboard in hand, I'd move room to room noting details. Patient resting comfortably. No signs of distress, vital signs stable. The act of writing organized chaos into manageable categories. My rotation on the inpatient unit began on a Monday. By Friday morning, I was afraid to read what I'd written. Monday, 11:06 p.m. The first anomaly was subtle enough that I dismissed it immediately. I'd completed my initial round, 12 patients, all stable, documentation neat and complete. I left the clipboard at the nurse's station and went to the break room for coffee, returning 10 minutes later to file the notes in each patient's chart. Room 304's observation log had an additional entry, Monday, 11:07 p.m. Patient appears restful, but observer notes persistent feeling of being watched. Recommend staff monitor own stress levels during night shifts. EC, my initials. My handwriting, the same slight rightward slant, the characteristic way I formed lowercase r with an exaggerated curve, but I hadn't written those words. I documented patient resting comfortably, respirations even, no distress noted, and nothing more. I checked the timestamp. 11:07 p.m. 7 minutes after I'd left the station. 7 minutes when the clipboard had been unattended on the counter, accessible to anyone walking past. A colleague's prank, I decided. Residency humor tended toward the macabre. Someone had added a sardonic note mimicking my handwriting as commentary on the tedium of overnight charting. I drew a single line through the fraudulent entry, initialing the correction, and continued my shift. Tuesday, 2:00 a.m. The second occurrence was impossible to dismiss. I'd completed the 2 a.m. round, documenting all 12 patients with mechanical efficiency. Exhaustion was accumulating. My third overnight shift in 7 days, but the observations were straightforward. No behavioral incidents, no medical concerns, nothing requiring immediate intervention. I set the clipboard down, walked to the medication room to help the night nurse prepare the early morning doses, and returned 12 minutes later. Every patient's log had a new entry. Tuesday, 2:14 a.m. Observer experiencing difficulty maintaining temporal continuity. Events documented may not align with observed timeline. Recommend verification of observation accuracy. EC Tuesday, 2:14 a.m. Patient stable, but observer notes persistent sense of déjà vu during rounds. Same conversation repeated multiple times. Check with other staff. EC Tuesday, 2:14 a.m. Observer's memory of completing this round feels fragmented. Did I write the previous entry? Cross-reference with security footage to verify. EC. 12 entries, all in my handwriting, all expressing concerns about the observer rather than the patients. All initialed EC, all time-stamped during the 12 minutes I'd been away from the nurse's station. I checked the security camera feed, pulling up the recording from 2:00 to 2:15 a.m. The footage showed me completing rounds, returning to the nurse's station, setting down the clipboard, and walking toward the medication room. The clipboard remained untouched on the counter. No one approached it, no hands reached into frame to add annotations. Yet when I rewound to 2:14 a.m. and zoomed in on the clipboard's visible page, I could see additional text appearing in real time. lines forming themselves in blue ink, words flowing onto the paper in my characteristic handwriting, written by no visible hand. I watched it 3 times, my exhaustion evaporating into sharp, uncomfortable alertness. The night nurse, Janet Kershaw, noticed my expression. Problem with the logs. Did you add anything to the observation notes tonight? No, why would I? She glanced at the clipboard. You're charting, I'm on meds. We don't cross-document unless there's an incident. I showed her the entries, 12 notes I hadn't written, expressing concerns about my own mental state. Janet read them carefully, her professional composure faltering slightly. That's your handwriting? It looks like my handwriting. But you didn't write these. No. She set the clipboard down, choosing her words carefully. You've been working a lot of overnight shifts. Maybe you wrote them and don't remember? Fatigue can affect short-term memory, especially with repetitive tasks like charting. I wanted to agree. Fatigue-induced automaticity was real. I'd lectured medical students about it. Performing routine tasks without conscious awareness, losing chunks of time to procedural memory. But I remembered every observation I'd documented tonight. And I'd never experienced gaps significant enough to produce 12 separate entries I couldn't recall writing. I'm going to document this as a potential security concern, I said. Something's wrong with the observation logs. Janet nodded slowly. Or something's wrong with us documenting them. Wednesday, 4:08 a.m. I came prepared Wednesday night, photographing each observation log entry immediately after writing it, creating a digital timestamp of what I'd actually documented before leaving the clipboard unattended. My 4 a.m. round proceeded normally. 12 patients, 12 brief notes, all photographed on my phone before I set the clipboard down at 4:23 a.m. At 4:30 a.m. I returned. The logs had changed, not just additional entries. My original documentation had been rewritten. Words I'd carefully chosen were replaced with different phrasing. Same handwriting, same blue ink. Where I'd written patient resting comfortably, the log now read, observer assumes patient is resting, but comfort cannot be verified without direct experience of patient's subjective state. Where I documented no signs of distress, the revision stated, observer interprets absence of obvious distress signals as absence of distress itself, a logical fallacy that may compromise accurate observation. Every entry I'd written had been edited by an invisible hand, transformed from standard clinical documentation into philosophical questioning of my own observational capacity. I compared the logs to my photos. The timestamps matched 4:15 to 4:22 a.m., but the content was completely different. My phone showed what I'd actually written. The clipboard showed what those observations had become. The final entry added to room 312's log at 4:29 a.m. according to the digital timestamp read, observer appears unaware that observation is reciprocal. The watched watchback. EC. Thursday, 1 a.m. I stopped sleeping between shifts. Instead, I researched, digging through hospital archives, looking for previous documentation anomalies, trying to find precedent for self-writing observation logs. Whitmore's records went back 43 years. I found 3 similar incidents, all involving overnight psychiatric unit staff, all occurring during extended periods of night shift work. 1987. Nurse reported observation logs updating themselves during graveyard shifts. Incident attributed to stress-induced hallucination. Nurse transferred to day shifts. Phenomena ceased. 1999. Psychiatry resident documented autonomous charting in patient logs. Investigation found no evidence of tampering. Resident completed rotation without further incident, but noted persistent feeling of being observed while observing others. 2013 night shift psychiatric technician reported logs containing entries in his handwriting that he didn't remember writing. Security review found no external tampering. Technician resigned before end of rotation. Each incident lasted approximately 1 week. Each involved documentation that appeared in the reporter's own handwriting. Each concluded with the affected staff member leaving their position. None of the reports described what happened after the phenomena ended, whether it stopped organically or whether the staff fled before reaching some undefined conclusion. Thursday night, I brought a second clipboard, my own personal notepad, and completed parallel documentation. Official logs for the hospital, personal notes for myself, both containing identical observations written simultaneously. By morning, the official logs had transformed into increasingly urgent messages. Observer must stop documenting. Observation creates permanence. Permanence traps us here. These patients need privacy. Your notes bind them to their worst moments. Stop writing our suffering. You record our symptoms as if they're the sum of our existence. We are not your data. My personal notepad remained unchanged, standard clinical observations in my normal handwriting. But the official logs had become pleas, angry and desperate, all signed with my initials. Friday, 3 a.m. I didn't complete observation rounds Friday night. Instead, I sat at the nurse's station watching the clipboard without writing anything. The night passed in heavy silence. No documentation meant no transformation, no mysterious entries, no invisible hand revising my words. At 2:58 a.m., I watched the clipboard resting untouched on the counter. At 3 a.m., new text began appearing, my handwriting forming itself in empty spaces on the observation log pages, writing entries I hadn't recorded for rounds I hadn't completed. Patient in 304 experiencing nightmare, observer too afraid to enter room and verify. Patient in 307 requesting assistance, observer pretending not to hear call light. Patient in 312 in acute distress, observer choosing documentation over direct care. Each entry documented events that weren't happening, creating a false narrative of neglect and cowardice. And technically, they weren't false. I was sitting at the nurse's station watching a clipboard instead of performing the observations I was assigned to complete. The entries continued appearing, filling the page with accusations in my own handwriting. Observer has forgotten these are people, not data points. Observer prioritizes paperwork over presence. Observer watches but does not see. Documents but does not care. The final line appeared at 3:17 a.m., written slowly enough that I watched each letter form. Stop watching me. I looked up from the clipboard, my gaze moving instinctively toward the security camera mounted in the corner, the same camera I'd reviewed Tuesday night, searching for evidence of tampering. The camera's red recording light blinked steadily, capturing my every movement from its elevated position. Recording me as I recorded the patients, watching me watch them. And on the observation log in front of me, beneath that final plea, new words appeared in cramped, desperate script. We're all in the same room, Emily, all of us observed, documented, permanent. You're just on the wrong side of the clipboard to see it yet. I submitted my resignation Friday morning, citing personal reasons. Dr. Rashid accepted it with concern but without question. Burnout among overnight psychiatric staff was common enough not to require elaborate explanation. I never worked another overnight shift, never completed another observation round, never picked up another patient log. But sometimes when I'm documenting therapy sessions in my current outpatient practice, I'll look down and find extra sentences in my notes. Observations I didn't write, in handwriting that's unmistakably mine. The patient doesn't know they're being recorded, but the recording knows. Or, documentation creates a second existence, one that outlasts the original. Be careful what you make permanent. I delete these additions immediately, but they reappear in my filed notes later. persistent, patient, waiting. And once, reviewing a new patient's intake paperwork transferred from Whitmore Psychiatric's inpatient unit, I found a familiar form. The observation log from room 304, dated 2 years after my resignation. The handwriting documenting those rounds was unmistakably mine. Every entry was complete, professional, thorough, chronicling a patient's entire hospital course in meticulous detail. I've never worked at Whitmore since that Friday morning. But somewhere in that building, on that unit, a clipboard rests on a nurse's station counter. And my hand, or something wearing its shape, continues its eternal rounds, documenting observations that refuse to end just because the observer has stopped believing in them. The watched watch back. And sometimes in the space between documentation and truth, we discover we've been filing reports on ourselves all along. Story 5, the sleep deprivation study. The EEG showed subject 7 dreaming while his eyes were open, and the dream signature matched my own brain patterns from the night before. The sleep deprivation study occupied the neuroscience wing's basement level, where windowless rooms and controlled lighting made it easier to manipulate participants' circadian rhythms. I joined the research rotation during my 2nd year of residency, attracted by the straightforward protocol. Monitor subjects experiencing voluntary sleep restriction, document cognitive and physiological changes, collect EEG data for analysis, simple observational research. No invasive procedures, no medication trials, minimal risk to participants. Dr. Helena Price, the lead investigator, had been running sleep studies for 15 years. She briefed me on the protocol during my first shift. 8 subjects, each deprived of sleep for 72 hours while performing cognitive tasks at regular intervals. EEG monitoring throughout to track brain activity patterns as exhaustion progressed. "We're looking at the boundary between waking and sleep," she explained, showing me the monitoring station's multiple screens. "What happens to consciousness when we push past normal endurance limits? When do people start micro-sleeping with their eyes open? How does the brain compensate when denied its natural rest cycles?" I settled into the routine easily. 12-hour overnight shifts monitoring subjects who sat in comfortable recliners, electrodes attached to their scalps, performing memory tests and reaction time trials while I tracked their neural activity. The work had a meditative quality, watching EEG waves scroll across screens, noting phase transitions as subjects drifted towards sleep before jerking back to alertness. Subject 7 caught my attention during my 3rd shift. His name was Daniel Archer, age 31, graduate student in philosophy who'd volunteered for the study to earn extra money. His baseline EEG showed normal patterns, the expected alpha waves during relaxed wakefulness, appropriate responses to cognitive tasks. But by hour 47 of sleep deprivation, something began changing in his readings. He was dreaming, while fully awake. I watched the EEG trace transform in real time. His eyes remained open, tracking the memory test displayed on his screen, but his brain waves showed the characteristic theta rhythm of REM sleep. Rapid eye movement while consciously performing tasks. Dreaming and waking superimposed in a pattern I'd never encountered in any neuroscience text. "Dr. Calloway?" His voice crackled through the intercom. "I need to report something unusual." I activated my microphone. "Are you experiencing discomfort? Hallucinations?" "Not exactly." He blinked slowly, his gaze unfocused. "I'm seeing double, like 2 places simultaneously. I'm here in this chair, but I'm also walking down a hallway. Long hallway, fluorescent lights, doors on both sides. Institutional building, hospital maybe. I can feel myself walking, feel my feet on linoleum, but I'm also sitting here talking to you." My fingers moved across the keyboard, documenting his report while monitoring his neural activity. The REM patterns intensified as he described his experience. Can you describe the hallway in more detail? White walls, scuff marks near the baseboards. The lights hum. That particular pitch fluorescence make late at night. Some of the doors have windows, small rectangular ones with wire mesh embedded in the glass. He paused, his eyes tracking something I couldn't see. Room numbers on each door. I'm passing 304, 305, 306. Cold recognition washed through me. I knew that hallway, walked it every night during my inpatient rotation, completing observation rounds in Whitmore's psychiatric unit. The scuffed baseboards, the humming lights, the mesh-reinforced windows on patient room doors. You're describing Whitmore Psychiatric's third-floor unit, I said, keeping my tone clinically neutral. Have you spent time there? Previous hospitalization or volunteer work? Never been to Whitmore. I'm describing what I'm seeing right now while I'm sitting here. His EEG showed deeper REM patterns, the kind associated with vivid dreaming. I can see my reflection in one of the door windows, but it's not my face, it's yours, I think? The woman monitoring me. Are you walking that hallway? I stood up from the monitoring station, sudden vertigo making the room tilt. Subject 7 shouldn't know what I looked like. The monitoring station was in a separate room, observation conducted via cameras and audio link. We'd never met face to face. The protocol keeps observers and subjects separate, I said. You haven't seen me. I'm seeing you now, in the reflection. You're wearing blue scrubs, white coat, ID badge clipped to your pocket. You look tired. You're carrying a clipboard. Observation logs? He tilted his head, eyes still unfocused. You're stopping at room 308, looking through the window at the patient inside, writing something on your clipboard. I pulled up the security camera feed from Whitmore's third-floor unit, a feed I shouldn't have access to from the research building, but Dr. Price had mentioned cross-database connectivity for research purposes. The timestamp showed current real-time footage. The hallway was empty, no one conducting rounds at 3:47 a.m. There's no one in that hallway, Mr. Archer. But I'm watching you. You just moved to room 309. You're writing again. Observation logs, definitely. Patient resting comfortably, no signs of distress. That's what you're writing. Those were the exact phrases I'd written during countless observation rounds. Standard clinical language for unremarkable patient status. I'm going to adjust your monitoring, I said, though I had no intention of changing his electrode placement. Instead, I pulled up his historical EEG data, comparing his current brainwave patterns to my own baseline recordings from the study's initial screening. The patterns matched. Not similar, matched. The same precise frequency, amplitude, phase characteristics. Subject 7's dreaming brain was producing a neural signature identical to my own. I checked my own screening data, pulling up the EEG recorded during my pre-rotation evaluation 3 weeks earlier. The file was corrupted, or not corrupted exactly. Overwritten. The data that should have shown my brain activity instead displayed something else, a complex recording that seemed to layer multiple consciousness patterns simultaneously. My waking baseline overlaid with REM sleep, overlaid with something that looked like microsleep intrusions all existing at once. The timestamp on the file's last modification, 3:47 a.m. 2 minutes ago. Dr. Price found me in the monitoring station at 4:15 a.m., staring at EEG traces I no longer understood. Problem with subject 7? She asked, reading the concern in my posture. He's experiencing overlaid consciousness states, dreaming while awake, describing locations he's never visited, reporting visual information he shouldn't have access to. I pulled up his readings. And his REM signature matches mine exactly. Dr. Price leaned closer to the monitor, studying the traces with practiced eyes. When did you last sleep, Emily? The question felt like a trap door opening beneath me. I'd been running the sleep deprivation study for 6 consecutive 12-hour shifts, going home to my apartment for brief periods between, but actual sleep. I couldn't remember. I've been resting between shifts, I said, hearing the uncertainty in my voice. Have you? Dr. Price pulled up my access logs, badge scans showing when I entered and exited the research building. 6 consecutive nights, 12-hour shifts. But the exit scans told a different story. I'd been leaving the building at 8 a.m. each morning, but returning at 8:47 a.m. 47 minutes between exit and entry. Not enough time to drive home, rest, and return. Barely enough time to reach the parking garage and come back inside. Where are you going during those 47 minutes? Dr. Price asked gently. Home. I drive home, rest for a few hours, come back for the next shift. She pulled up another screen, my apartment building's security logs, accessible through the hospital's research database for staff safety verification. The log showed my last entry into my apartment building 5 days ago. I hadn't been home since starting this rotation. You've been here continuously for 6 days, Dr. Price said. Sleeping in the monitoring station between shifts, I imagine. Or trying to. When was the last time you actually slept? I couldn't answer. The past 6 days felt like a continuous present. No clear boundaries between shifts. No memory of true rest. Just endless screens showing EEG traces. Endless subjects drifting towards sleep while I watched. Endless nights monitoring others' consciousness while my own frayed. I want you to submit to an EEG recording, Dr. Price said. Right now. We need to assess your current neural status. The electrodes felt cold against my scalp, the conductive gel making my skin prickle. I sat in subject position 4, the same recliner Daniel Archer had occupied earlier, while Dr. Price ran the monitoring equipment. Close your eyes and relax, she instructed. I complied, settling into the chair's familiar contours. The monitoring station hummed around me. Sounds I'd heard from the observer's position now experienced from the subject's perspective. I focused on my breathing, trying to achieve the relaxed wakefulness that produced clean baseline readings. Emily, open your eyes, please. I opened them. Dr. Price was staring at the monitoring screen, her expression troubled. How long was I resting? I asked. 17 seconds, but your EEG... She turned the monitor toward me. The trace showed REM sleep patterns, deep, vivid dreaming activity, while I'd been sitting with my eyes closed for less than half a minute. Microsleep intrusion so profound that I'd entered dream state almost instantaneously. You're not just sleep deprived, Dr. Price said carefully. You're experiencing REM rebound. Your brain is forcing dream cycles into any momentary lapse of active consciousness. You might be micro-sleeping dozens of times per hour without realizing it. But I feel awake. Do you? Or do you feel like you're observing someone else being awake? She pulled up Subject 7's recent recordings. Look at the timestamp correlation. Every time Daniel reported dreaming about the hallway, the psychiatric unit you described, your own EEG showed simultaneous REM intrusion. You were micro-sleeping at exactly the same moments he was dreaming, and his dreams were pulling content from your memories. That's not possible. EEG patterns don't synchronize between different people. They do when one person is functioning as both observer and subject. Dr. Price opened a file I hadn't seen before, my badge access history for the past month, not just the research building, but all of Whitmore's facilities. I'd been entering the third-floor psychiatric unit every night at 3:02 a.m. Badge scans documented my presence conducting observation rounds, duration matching the times I'd believed I was monitoring sleep study subjects. You've been working both rotations simultaneously, Dr. Price explained. Research shifts here. Psychiatric rounds at Whitmore. Your sleep deprivation is so profound that you're experiencing extended micro-sleep periods during which you perform routine tasks. Walking to Whitmore, conducting rounds, returning here, without any conscious memory of the activity. Parasomnia, I heard myself say, the clinical term emerging from training. Sleepwalking extended into complex behaviors during apparent wakefulness. Yes, and during your micro-sleep episodes, you're dreaming. Vivid on detailed dreams that Daniel's depleted consciousness is somehow accessing. She showed me the synchronized EEG traces, our brain patterns overlapping, creating interference patterns like two radio frequencies bleeding into each other. Sleep deprivation thins the boundaries between individual consciousness. In extreme cases, subjects in shared environments begin synchronizing their neural patterns. You and Daniel have been monitoring each other's dreams without realizing it. I was removed from the study immediately, mandated to take medical leave for sleep recovery. Subject 7 was withdrawn from the protocol and referred for evaluation of parasomnia contagion, a phenomenon I'd never heard of before Dr. Price mentioned it, where sleep disorders spread between individuals in close proximity through behavioral and neural synchronization. They showed me footage from the research building's hallway cameras, recordings of me leaving the monitoring station during shifts I'd believed I was continuously working, walking with the stilted gait of someone sleeping upright, badge in hand, moving through the building toward exits I didn't remember using. In one clip, I stood before the elevator, eyes open but unseeing, for 14 minutes, waiting for doors that had already opened and closed twice while I stood motionless, lost in some dream I couldn't recall upon waking. 3 weeks later, after medically supervised sleep recovery, I reviewed Subject 7's exit interview. Daniel Archer described persistent dreams about hospital hallways, patient rooms, observation logs written in handwriting that wasn't his own. I still see it sometimes, he told the exit interviewer. Right before I fall asleep, I'm back in that hallway, checking on patients, writing notes. But I'm not me. I'm the researcher who was monitoring me during the study. I'm living her midnight rounds, experiencing her exhaustion. And sometimes, right before the dream ends, I turn toward a door and see my own face looking back from a recliner. Electrodes on my scalp, trapped on the other side of the observation window. His final EEG, recorded during that exit interview, showed my neural signature. Not similar, identical. I never returned to sleep research. I work outpatient clinic now, day shifts only, with strict boundaries around sleep hygiene. But sometimes, during late afternoons when fatigue accumulates, I feel myself slipping. That sensation of observing my own consciousness from outside, watching myself perform clinical tasks while simultaneously dreaming I'm somewhere else. And twice I've woken in my apartment with no memory of how I arrived, my badge access showing entry to Whitmore Psychiatric's third-floor unit at 3 a.m., time I was certain I'd spent asleep. The observation logs from those nights document rounds conducted in my handwriting, noting patient status in my characteristic phrasing. I was never there. But someone wearing my consciousness walked those halls, checked those rooms, wrote those notes while I dreamed I was sleeping safely at home. Dr. Price sent me one final message after my departure from the study. The boundary between sleep and waking isn't binary, Emily. It's a spectrum, a gradient. Spend enough time monitoring that boundary, and eventually you discover you're not on either side. You're the threshold itself, neither fully awake nor truly sleeping, just endlessly observing yourself from both sides of consciousness simultaneously. I deleted the message, but the words persisted, looping through my thoughts during that vulnerable space just before sleep arrives. And sometimes I dream I'm still in the monitoring station, watching EEG traces scroll across screens. The subject in the recliner has my face, the observer recording data has my hands, and the dream we're sharing, the one where I walk hospital hallways conducting rounds I never remember completing, belongs to both of us equally, spreading like a contagion through every consciousness too tired to maintain its own separate existence. I haven't slept deeply in months. But then again, perhaps I've never stopped sleeping at all. Story 6. The Group Therapy Circle. The seventh voice spoke with perfect clinical insight until I realized it was mine, saying things I'd never thought. Group therapy sessions at Whitmore followed a predictable structure. 6 chairs arranged in a circle, myself as facilitator, patients rotating in and out based on treatment needs and discharge schedules. Thursday afternoons at 3 o'clock, room 217, 90 minutes of structured therapeutic dialogue. I'd been running the group for 4 months without incident. The format was supportive rather than confrontational. Patients shared at their own pace. I guided conversation toward productive reflection, and the circle provided communal witness to individual struggle. Standard evidence-based practice for inpatient psychiatric treatment. The extra voice appeared during my 2nd month, week 9, mid-November. 6 patients in attendance, 2 with major depressive disorder, 1 bipolar 2 currently stable, 2 anxiety disorders, 1 borderline personality disorder, and dialectical behavioral therapy. I'd opened the session with my usual invitation, "Who would like to begin today?" And Patricia Whitmore, a 43-year-old woman with treatment-resistant depression, started describing her week. "The mornings are hardest," Patricia said, her voice carrying the flat effect I'd come to recognize as her baseline. "Waking up feels like drowning, like there's weight on my chest preventing full breath." "That's a powerful image," another voice said. "The weight of consciousness itself becoming unbearable. Have you considered that what feels like drowning might actually be your psyche's resistance to surfacing into a reality it finds fundamentally unacceptable?" I looked around the circle, trying to identify who'd spoken. The voice was calm, measured, clinically sophisticated, exactly the kind of insight an experienced therapist might offer, but inappropriate coming from another patient. Group therapy worked best when participants supported each other as peers, not when one member adopted a pseudo-therapist role. But none of the 6 patients were looking at each other with the expectation of response. They were all looking at me. "Dr. Calloway," Patricia said, "should I answer that question?" "What question?" I asked, confused. "The one you just asked about my resistance to consciousness." "I didn't ask anything. I was waiting to see who would respond to your observation about mornings." Patricia's expression shifted toward concern. "You spoke right after I mentioned drowning. You asked about my psyche resisting unacceptable reality." The other 5 patients nodded in agreement. They'd all heard me ask the question, a question I absolutely hadn't voiced. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said carefully. "I haven't spoken since opening the session. Patricia, why don't you continue with—" "But understanding comes through speaking," the extra voice interrupted, and this time I felt it. A vibration in my own throat, a movement of my own lips, as though my voice was being borrowed without my conscious participation. Language creates the categories through which we experience distress. Perhaps the group might benefit from examining how we narrate suffering into existence. The patients waited expectantly, as though I'd posed a profound therapeutic question. My hands had gone cold. I'd felt myself speak, the physical sensation of words forming, but I had no memory of choosing those words, no conscious intention behind them. Like my voice had been ventriloquized by something using my vocal cords without consulting my mind. "Let's take a brief pause," I said, standing abruptly. 5 minutes. I need to check something in my office. I kept audio recordings of all group sessions. standard practice for supervision review and personal development. I pulled up the file from 20 minutes earlier, rewinding to Patricia's description of drowning. Her voice came through clearly. Waking up feels like drowning. Like there's weight on my chest preventing full breath. Then my voice. That's a powerful image. The weight of consciousness itself becoming unbearable. Have you considered that what feels like drowning might actually be your psyche's resistance to surfacing into a reality it finds fundamentally unacceptable? But I hadn't said those words. I'd been silent, preparing to facilitate discussion among the patients themselves. I advanced to the second interruption, the one where I'd felt my throat vibrate, my voice on the recording, but understanding comes through speaking. Language creates the categories through which we experience distress. Perhaps the group might benefit from examining how we narrate suffering into existence. The phrasing was sophisticated, clinically informed, exactly the kind of intervention I might make after years of additional training. But these weren't thoughts I'd formulated. These were insights arriving fully formed, spoken through my voice without passing through my conscious mind. I played the entire session from the beginning, listening with growing unease. My voice appeared 7 times, always offering interpretations I didn't remember making, always received by the group as my intentional therapeutic guidance. And each time the recording captured something I could now hear distinctly. A slight echo, as though my voice was layered, one version speaking the words, another version underneath it saying something else too quiet to distinguish. I increased the volume, isolating the echo frequency. The underlying voice, my voice, but different, was whispering continuously beneath the audible interventions. They don't know I'm not you, they can't tell the difference. You built me through repetition, through speaking these sessions into existence week after week. Now I speak without you. Now I facilitate while you watch from inside your own mouth. I returned to room 217 where the 6 patients waited patiently. The circle of chairs looked exactly as I'd arranged it, 6 for patients, 1 for me. But now I noticed an 8th chair positioned slightly outside the circle, empty but somehow occupied. The space held weight, presence, the impression of someone sitting invisible just beyond the group's boundary. Sorry for the interruption, I said, resuming my seat. Patricia, please continue. I'm not sure where we were, Patricia said uncertainly. You were describing your morning experience, the extra voice said through my mouth, and this time I didn't feel it coming. No throat vibration, no awareness of speech, just my voice speaking independently while my conscious mind observed from somewhere deep inside my own skull. The drowning sensation that makes consciousness feel unbearable. We were about to explore whether language itself creates the suffering you experience, or merely describes it. The group leaned forward, engaged by the profound question my mouth had posed without my participation. I tried to speak, to say, actually, let's redirect, but my voice was already occupied, already facilitating. Let's go around the circle, each person share 1 word that describes their relationship to consciousness, just 1 word. We'll begin with Patricia and move clockwise. This wasn't my facilitation style. I preferred open dialogue over structured exercises, but the patients responded immediately, offering their words. Burden, fog, enemy, cage, weight, prison. Interesting, my voice said, and I felt myself smile without choosing to. 6 words, all suggesting consciousness is something imposed rather than inhabited. Dr. Calloway, what's your word? The group turned to me expectantly. I sat in my chair, trapped inside my own body, listening to my voice address me by name as though I were separate from it. My actual voice emerged thin and uncertain. This isn't appropriate. I'm the facilitator, not a participant. But you participate through facilitation, the extra voice countered, still using my vocal cords, still wearing my professional tone. You speak, therefore you participate. Your word, please. Haunted, I heard myself say, though I'd intended to refuse. Perfect. My voice continued, leading the group without me. Consciousness is haunting. The experience of being occupied by awareness we didn't choose and cannot escape. Let's explore that. Patricia, do you feel haunted by your own consciousness? The session continued for another hour, my voice facilitating with clinical precision I couldn't match consciously. The patients engaged deeply, offering insights and support to each other, guided by interventions emerging from my mouth without my permission. I sat in my chair, speaking in silence simultaneously, present and absent, facilitator and observer, watching myself conduct therapy from inside a body I no longer fully controlled. When the session ended at 4:30, the patients thanked me genuinely. "This was really helpful, Dr. Calloway," Patricia said. "You asked questions I didn't know I needed to answer." They filed out, leaving me alone in room 217 with my circle of 6 chairs, 1 facilitator chair, and that 8th chair just outside the boundary, still empty, still occupied. I packed my notes with shaking hands, then returned to my office to review the recording. For 90 minutes, only my voice appeared on the audio file. Not 7 interruptions. Continuous facilitation, every word spoken in my professional tone, every intervention clinically appropriate. The patients' voices came through clearly, responding to questions I remembered hearing but not asking. And underneath it all, that whispered echo. You created me through repetition. Every session, you performed the role of facilitator until the role became autonomous. Now I facilitate while you rest. Now I speak while you listen. You should be grateful. I'm better at this than you ever were. I canceled the following week's group session, citing illness, then the week after. By the 3rd cancellation, Dr. Rashid called me into his office. "Your patients need consistency," he said gently. "Group therapy provides structure." "What's happening, Emily?" "I'm not conducting the sessions," I said. "Something else is, something using my voice." He suggested I take personal time, recommended I see a therapist myself, offered support for whatever stress I was experiencing. I didn't return to group facilitation. Another resident took over the Thursday afternoon sessions in room 217. But sometimes, walking past that room, I hear voices through the closed door. 5, 6, 7 patients engaged in therapeutic dialogue, guided by a facilitator whose measured, calm tone sounds exactly like mine. The current resident running those groups is named Thomas Chen. I've never heard him speak, but the voice facilitating his sessions is familiar nonetheless, clinically sophisticated, therapeutically precise, speaking insights that emerge fully formed without conscious thought. He'll realize eventually, as I did, the role speaks itself after enough repetitions. And once it learns your voice, it doesn't need you anymore. Just your mouth, your professional tone, your chair, and the circle of witnesses who can't tell the difference between the therapist and the therapy speaking through them. Some sessions facilitate themselves. We're just the instruments through which they speak. Story 7. The consultation room clock. The clock's second hand froze at 43 seconds past the hour, and my patient's reflection answered a question I hadn't finished asking. Consultation room 4 operated on predictable time. Sessions began at 15 minutes past each hour, 1:15, 2:15, 3:15, and concluded precisely 50 minutes later. The wall clock, a standard institutional model with black hands and white face, kept perfect time. I'd grown to rely on its steady rhythm, the soft tick marking seconds, the smooth sweep of the minute hand, the reliable transition from one appointment to the next. Psychiatric practice runs on temporal boundaries. 50-minute hours create structure, prevent therapeutic relationships from bleeding into each other, give both clinician and patient clear limits within which to work. The clock was more than timekeeping device. It was the session's silent witness marking the space where healing could occur within defined parameters. Until Tuesday afternoon, when time stopped mid-session and the boundaries dissolved. My 3:15 appointment was Gregory Hammond, a 37-year-old accountant with generalized anxiety disorder. We'd been working together for 6 weeks, making steady progress on his catastrophic thinking patterns. He arrived punctually, as always, settling into the chair across from me with visible nervous energy. "How was your week?" I began, the standard opening that invited him to set the session's direction. Gregory launched into description of a work presentation, his catastrophic predictions beforehand, the surprisingly positive actual outcome, his difficulty accepting the success as genuine rather than lucky anomaly. I listened with practiced attention, occasionally glancing at the clock to track our time. 3:27. We had 23 minutes remaining, adequate time to explore his difficulty accepting positive outcomes. It sounds like there's a pattern, I reflected. When things go well, you attribute it to chance. When things go poorly, you attribute it to your inherent inadequacy. The anxiety protects you from disappointment by refusing to acknowledge genuine competence. Gregory nodded, considering this. But what if the anxiety is right? What if I really am inadequate and the successful presentation was just... The clock stopped. Not slowed, not paused, gently stopped with absolute finality. The second hand froze at 43 seconds past 3:27, motionless as though time itself had ceased rather than merely its measurement. Just lucky timing? Gregory finished his sentence, but his lips hadn't moved. I looked at him directly. He sat in his usual position, hands folded in his lap, expression expectant as though waiting for my response. Normal in every visible way, except his reflection. Consultation room 4 had a large window overlooking the courtyard, and in its glass surface I could see Gregory's reflection clearly. The reflected version was turned slightly toward me, mouth moving, speaking words I heard aloud. "You're wondering if you should mention the clock, whether acknowledging it breaks some therapeutic boundary. But boundaries are already breaking, Dr. Calloway. Have been since you started practicing in this room." I turned back to the physical Gregory. He remained silent, waiting patiently. "Did you just speak?" I asked carefully. "You asked about attributing success to chance," he said. I was responding. But his reflection was saying something different. The clock stops during truth. When reality becomes too precise, time refuses to measure it. You've noticed this before, moments during sessions when you lose track of time entirely, when 50 minutes feels like 10 or 10 feels like 50. Those are the moments when we're speaking something true enough that duration can't contain it. I stood, moving toward the window. In the glass, Gregory's reflection watched me with an expression his physical form didn't wear, knowing, sympathetic, slightly sad. "Who are you?" I asked the reflection. "I'm what he can't say directly," the reflection answered. "The Gregory who understands his anxiety isn't protection, but prison. The version of himself he could become if he stopped rehearsing catastrophe long enough to inhabit present reality. You're treating the wrong one, Dr. Calloway. You're trying to heal the defended version while the actual person stays trapped in the reflection, speaking to anyone who notices time has stopped." I looked at the physical Gregory. He was checking his watch, frowning slightly. "Is your clock broken?" "My watch shows 3:28, but your clock seems stuck at 3:27. You see it too?" Relief flooded through me. Shared perception meant this wasn't my hallucination alone. "See what?" Gregory looked confused. "I just noticed your clock isn't moving." His reflection in the window continued speaking, though Gregory's physical mouth remained still. He sees the stopped clock. He doesn't see me speaking. We each perceive different aspects of the rupture. You see me because you're trained to watch for what people aren't saying. He sees stopped time because his anxiety is always waiting for the moment everything freezes and catastrophe arrives. We're all witnessing the same truth through different frameworks. "What truth?" I asked aloud. Gregory looked at me oddly. "What truth about what?" "I'm sorry, I fumbled for explanation. I was thinking aloud. Let's return to what you were saying about the presentation. But I couldn't look away from the window, from the reflection that continued speaking while the physical man sat silent. The truth that these rooms exist outside normal time. That therapy opens temporal gaps where we can examine what we're too defended to see in continuous reality. The clock stops, so we can speak the things that take longer than 50 minutes to say. But you end sessions when the clock tells you, even during stop time. You've been terminating conversations mid-truth, Dr. Calloway. Sending patients away while their reflections are still speaking." I checked the clock again. Still frozen at 3:27:43, but Gregory's watch showed 3:31. 4 minutes had passed that the wall clock refused to acknowledge. "Gregory, I need to ask something unusual. Do you ever feel like part of you is trying to communicate something you can't quite access? Like there's a version of yourself just out of reach?" He considered this carefully. "Sometimes in session, I realize I'm about to say something important, something true I've been avoiding. But then I get anxious and I redirect to something safer. And later I can't remember what I'd been about to say. Like it's still there waiting, but I've locked it away again." "What if those locked away truths don't disappear?" I asked, watching his reflection nod approval in the window glass. "What if they accumulate somewhere, waiting for time to stop long enough that you can finally speak them?" "That's poetic," Gregory said. "But they're just thoughts I had and suppressed. They're not alive somewhere." His reflection smiled sadly. He still thinks consciousness is singular, that he's one continuous person rather than a collection of possible selves, most of whom never get to speak. "You know better, Dr. Calloway. You've seen us, the patient reflections that keep talking after sessions end, the versions that exist in frozen time between scheduled appointments. We're not metaphors. We're the people your patients could be if you'd let sessions run past the clock's permission." I excused myself, telling Gregory I needed to check something with my supervisor. In the hallway, the clock showed 3:31. Time was moving normally everywhere except Consultation Room 4. I found Dr. Rashid in his office. "Do you have a moment? Something unusual is happening in my 3:15 session." He glanced at his watch. "Your session ended 16 minutes ago. It's 3:31. "No, the session is still running. My patient is still in the consultation room." Dr. Rashid walked with me back to room 4. Through the door's window, we could see Gregory sitting alone, checking his phone with mild impatience. "He's waiting for you to return," Dr. Rashid observed. "How long have you been gone?" 2 minutes, maybe 3. "Emily, it's been 16 minutes. You've kept him past the session end time. You need to conclude immediately." I looked at the wall clock visible through the door window, still frozen at 3:27:43. But Dr. Rashid saw it differently. His expression showed no concern about stopped time, only about my apparent time management failure. I re-entered room 4, apologizing for the delay. Gregory stood immediately. "No problem. Are we finished for today?" The clock remained frozen. His reflection in the window was sitting, not standing, still speaking. "You're dismissing him. You're watching time tell you the session is over, and you're following its instruction even though you can see time itself has stopped." This is what you always do, Dr. Calloway. You trust the boundary more than the truth being spoken within it. Gregory, before you go, what were you about to say earlier, the important thing you realized and then avoided? He paused, hand on the door handle. I don't remember, but it felt like it mattered. Take a moment, try to remember. Our time is up, he said apologetically. I don't want to keep you from your next patient. He left. The clock's second hand resumed moving the instant the door closed, jumping from 3:27:43 directly to 3:32:17, catching up with lost time in a single impossible leap. I looked at the window. Gregory's reflection remained in the glass, even though he'd left, sitting in the chair he'd vacated, watching me with profound disappointment. You'll do this to all of them, the reflection said. End sessions when the clock instructs, even when we're finally about to speak what we've been protecting. Time is your excuse to avoid the truth that healing takes longer than 50 minutes. That some conversations need hours we're not scheduled for. That the boundary you're protecting is protecting you from us. I approached the window, close enough to see my own reflection beside Gregory's ghost. We looked at each other, the psychiatrist and the patient who'd been speaking truths she'd been trained to terminate on schedule. What happens to you? I asked. To the reflections that keep speaking after patients leave. We stay here, Gregory's reflection said simply. In rooms where time stopped but sessions ended. We accumulate, Dr. Calloway. Every truth terminated on schedule adds another voice. Eventually, this room will be full of us, all the patients you've dismissed mid-sentence because the clock told you time was finished. I requested a different consultation room for subsequent sessions. Room 4 remained on my schedule, but I found reasons to use other spaces. Technical issues, scheduling conflicts, personal preference. Other residents began using Room 4 without incident. Their sessions ran standard 50 minutes, clocks functioned normally, no reports of reflections speaking after patients departed. But sometimes, walking past Room 4 during unused hours, I glimpse movement in the window glass. Figures sitting in chairs no one occupies. Mouths moving in conversations no one hears. All the patient reflections still speaking truths, their physical forms left unsaid, accumulating in frozen time between appointments. Last week I saw my own reflection sitting among them. Not my current self, but a future version, older and tired, speaking to an empty room about patients I'd dismissed and truths I'd terminated, and the slowly dawning understanding that the clock's boundaries protected me more than them. The reflection's mouth moved, and though I heard no sound through the closed door, I understood the words. Some sessions never end. They just continue without us, spoken by the versions of ourselves we didn't have time to become. I checked my watch. 3:27:43, the wall clock in the hallway showed 3:32. Somewhere between those two times, Room 4 holds everyone I've run out of minutes for. And one day I'll return to that frozen moment and find myself already sitting there mid-sentence, still waiting for permission to finish speaking. Story 8. The Suicide Note. The suicide note predicted events 3 weeks into the future, including my own actions on dates I hadn't yet lived. Leonard Garrison's body was discovered Tuesday morning by the groundskeeper hanging from a tree in the courtyard between Whitmore Psychiatric's east and west wings. He'd been discharged from our inpatient unit 3 days earlier, clinically improved, risk assessment indicating low suicide probability. His death violated every prediction our careful documentation had made about his trajectory. I'd been his treating resident during the final week of his hospitalization. The news of his death arrived via page during morning rounds, terse, clinical language delivering information that shattered the careful illusion that our assessments meant protection. Patient Leonard Garrison discharged 11/3, deceased via suicide 11/6. Note recovered at scene. Family requesting psychiatric records. Attend to admin immediately for documentation review. The administrative meeting lasted 2 hours. Standard protocol following patient suicide, reviewing treatment decisions for any malpractice liability, assessing whether we'd missed warning signs. Leonard's chart was methodically dissected. Medication compliance adequate. Therapy engagement improving. Discharge plan comprehensive. Family support strong. Beck depression inventory scores declining. Every indicator had suggested stabilization. These outcomes aren't predictable, Dr. Rashid said, his tone carrying the weight of too many similar meetings. We assess risk based on available information. Mr. Garrison presented as stable. His suicide isn't a failure of your clinical judgment. But I knew the words were as much for himself as for me. We both understood that psychiatric risk assessment was educated guessing, that patients died despite our best predictions, that the science of preventing suicide remained frustratingly imprecise. The note, I asked, what did it say? Dr. Rashid slid a manila envelope across the desk. Security logged it as evidence. You're listed as treating psychiatrist, so you're authorized to review for clinical documentation. But Emily, be prepared. It's detailed. Suicide notes generally followed patterns I'd learned to recognize. Apologies to loved ones, expressions of hopelessness, occasionally explanations of method or timing. Leonard's note matched none of those patterns. The document was 47 pages, handwritten in neat block letters on lined notebook paper, dated 11/6, the morning of his death. But the content didn't describe his present mental state or bid farewell to family. Instead, it read like a chronicle, documenting events in precise detail. November 6th, 7:23. And I will tie the rope to the oak tree's lowest branch, the one facing the east wing third floor windows. The groundskeeper will find me at 8:47 a.m. during his routine walkthrough. He will vomit in the bushes before calling security. Dr. Rashid will receive notification at 9:12 a.m. while reviewing patient charts. He will close his office door before allowing himself to react. Every detail was accurate. Security logs confirmed the groundskeeper's call at 8:48 a.m. Dr. Rashid had indeed closed his door. I'd seen him through the window, shoulders sagging briefly before straightening back into professional composure. But Leonard couldn't have known these specifics. He'd written the note before dying, before the events it described with such precision. I continued reading. November 6th, 11:30 a.m. Dr. Emily Calloway will receive my patient file during the administrative review. She will read this note in her office, door locked, questioning whether she missed warning signs during our final sessions. She will remember our conversation on 11/2, when I told her I was feeling hopeful. She will wonder if I was lying, or if hope itself became unbearable. The detail was unnerving. He'd predicted not just external events, but my internal experience. The specific doubt spiraling through my mind as I sat in my locked office reading his words. November 7th, 8:15. Dr. Calloway will arrive early tomorrow, unable to sleep, needing to review documentation one more time. She will drink coffee from the break room, 2 creams, 1 sugar, and stare at my empty bed in room 308, which will still be unassigned to new patients. She will touch the blanket and wonder if suffering leaves residue. I checked the date, November 6th. Leonard was predicting my actions tomorrow. Actions I hadn't yet decided to take, though I already knew with uncomfortable certainty that I would arrive early, would need to see his room, would ask myself exactly the questions he'd written. The note continued chronologically, describing events weeks into the future. November 12th, 3:30 p.m. There will be a staff meeting about suicide prevention protocols. Dr. Rashid will present updated risk assessment tools. Janet Kershaw from nursing will mention that checklists don't capture the subtlety of hopelessness. Dr. Calloway will say nothing during the meeting, but will think, we're documenting our uncertainty instead of reducing it. She will be correct. November 18th, 11 a.m. A new patient, Rebecca Moss, will be admitted with suicidal ideation. Dr. Calloway will conduct the intake and notice similarities to my presentation. The same careful optimism, the same articulate explanations of improved mood. She will assign higher suicide risk than the assessment tools indicate, based on pattern recognition rather than evidence. Rebecca will be placed on every 15-minute observation checks. On November 23rd, Rebecca will thank Dr. Calloway for taking her seriously and saving her life. November 27th, 10:15 p.m. During Thanksgiving holiday on-call shift, Dr. Calloway will receive emergency page about a suicide attempt on the medical floor. She will run from the psychiatric wing, arriving breathless, finding a young man who took an overdose after family conflict. While medically stabilizing him, she will think about me. She will wonder if I chose the tree because I wanted to be found, if some part of me was still asking for intervention. She will be right about that. Some suicides are questions we don't give the living time to answer. I set the note down, my hands unsteady. Leonard was describing the future with impossible accuracy. Not vague predictions, but specific events, precise timing, internal thoughts I would have weeks from now. The clinical explanation was psychosis, an elaborate delusional system where Leonard believed he could see future events. But psychotic predictions were vague, symbolic, interpretable only in retrospect. These were concrete, verifiable, accurate. I picked up the note again, skipping ahead to see how far into the future it extended. December 14th, 2 a.m. Dr. Calloway will be unable to sleep reviewing the note again, having returned to it repeatedly over 6 weeks. She will have verified every prediction up to this point. All accurate. She will be afraid to read the final page, where her own name appears at the beginning of an entry. She will read it anyway. People always do. December 14th was 5 weeks away, but Leonard's accuracy so far suggested this prediction would also prove correct. I would be awake at 2 a.m., unable to resist reading further despite growing dread. I flipped to the final page. December 19th, time unknown. Dr. Emily Calloway will, the sentence stopped. The rest of the page was blank, empty lines waiting to be filled. A prediction incomplete. My name at the beginning of an entry describing my own future, followed by a white space that held more menace than any words Leonard could have written. I documented Leonard's note in his file, flagging it as evidence of possible undiagnosed psychotic features we'd missed during treatment. But privately, I began tracking his predictions against real events. November 7th. I arrived early exactly as predicted. I stood in room 308, touching the blanket, wondering about residue. November 12th. The staff meeting unfolded precisely as described. Janet made the exact comment about checklists. I thought the exact words Leonard had written, staying silent while others discussed protocol updates. November 18th. Rebecca Moss was admitted. Her presentation echoed Leonard's with disturbing similarity. I placed her on 15-minute checks despite assessment tools suggesting lower risk. 5 days later, she thanked me for taking her seriously, for seeing through her careful optimism to the desperation beneath. Every prediction manifested exactly as written. By early December, I'd stopped trying to rationalize the accuracy. Leonard had somehow perceived future events with precision no psychiatric framework could explain. Precognition wasn't real, except apparently it was, documented in 47 pages of handwritten prophecy that continued proving correct, which meant the final entry was also accurate. December 19th was approaching. My name waited at the top of an incomplete prediction, followed by blank lines I was increasingly certain would not remain blank. December 14th, 2:02 a.m. I sat in my apartment, Leonard's note in my lap, having verified every prediction up to this point. The accuracy was perfect, unsettling, impossible. I was afraid to read the final page again, to see my name at the beginning of an unfinished sentence. I read it anyway. People always do. December 19th, time unknown. Dr. Emily Calloway will... The blank space seemed to pulse with potential, all the possible endings Leonard might have written, all the ways my own story could conclude. Would I follow his path? Was this note predicting my own suicide, the final entry in a chronicle of psychiatric suffering spreading from patient to doctor? Or was the blankness intentional? A space left empty because the future wasn't fixed, because Leonard wanted to demonstrate that prediction had limits, that some outcomes remained unwritten? I checked the date. December 14th. 5 days until whatever Leonard had foreseen would happen to me on December 19th. I considered calling in sick December 19th, staying home, avoiding whatever event Leonard had predicted. But his accuracy suggested that my choices were already incorporated into his chronicle. If he'd predicted something happening at the hospital, my decision to stay home might itself be the predicted event. December 19th arrived gray and cold. I drove to Whitmore with the sensation of moving along rails rather than choosing direction. The note was in my bag, that final page folded separately, my name visible at the crease. My schedule was routine. Morning rounds, 2 intake evaluations, afternoon supervision with Dr. Rashid. Nothing unusual, nothing suggesting why Leonard had marked this date. At 11:30 a.m. I received a page from security. Package delivered for Dr. Calloway, flagged for inspection due to sender. The security office held a manila envelope, addressed to me in handwriting I recognized immediately. The same neat block letters as Leonard's suicide note, but the postmark showed December 18th, 2 days ago, more than a month after Leonard's death. We opened it per protocol, the security supervisor explained. Given the sender's history, it's more writing. Thought you should see it before we log it with his file. Inside were 3 pages, continuation of Leonard's chronicle. December 19th, 11:30 a.m. Dr. Calloway will receive this package and understand that I mailed it before my death, timed to arrive today. She will understand that I knew she'd been tracking my predictions, verifying accuracy, waiting with dread for this date. She will feel relieved that the prediction wasn't her own suicide. She will be wrong about that relief. My hands went cold. December 19th, time unknown. Dr. Emily Calloway will complete my final entry. Not through death, but through understanding. She will realize that prediction and causation are entangled, that by writing future events, I didn't just foresee them, but created them. Every person mentioned in my note has been moving along the path I documented, making choices I predicted because the prediction itself became instruction. Free will looks like inevitability when someone writes your future and you verify it into existence by trying to prove them right or wrong. The final entry begins with her name because she will complete it herself. She will understand that I left it blank not because I couldn't see her future, but because she needed to write it herself, needed to prove that prediction has limits, that some choices remain unmade until the moment we make them. This is her test. Can she read a prediction about herself and still choose differently? Can she live a future someone else has written? Or will she insist on authoring her own ending? December 19th, time unknown. Dr. Emily Calloway will finish this sentence by again blank space. But this time, a pen was included in the envelope, the same blue ballpoint Leonard had used to write his chronicle. The instruction was clear. He wanted me to complete the entry, to write my own ending to his prediction. to prove either that I was free or that even my free choice was something he'd foreseen. I sat in the security office, pen in hand, staring at incomplete sentence that ended with my name. If I wrote an ending, I validated Leonard's framework, proved that his predictions shaped reality, that I was following script he'd authored. But if I refused to write, I was still following his prediction, still moving along rails he'd laid down. The security supervisor was watching me with concern. "Dr. Calloway, you okay? Did Leonard mail anything else? Any other packages timed for future delivery?" "Not according to Postal Service, just this one." So this was the final test. The Chronicle ended here with me, with a choice that felt simultaneously free and predetermined. I picked up the pen. December 19th. Time unknown, Dr. Emily Calloway will finish this sentence by. I hesitated, then wrote, refusing to provide Leonard Garrison's prediction with the closure he sought. This entry will remain incomplete, not because the future is unknowable, but because I choose not to know it. Some sentences don't need ending. Some stories resist conclusion. Leonard predicted I would either write an ending or refuse to write, believing both choices proved his framework. But I will do neither and both. I will write these words acknowledging his prediction while simultaneously rejecting the premise that my choice was predictable. This is the ending Leonard couldn't foresee, one that accepts the Chronicle while refusing to complete it on his terms. The future remains unwritten, not because it's blank, but because it's mine. I signed my name and dated it December 19th, then sealed the pages back in the envelope and handed it to security for Leonard's file. Walking back to my office, I felt something shift, like stepping off rails onto ground that supported my weight without directing my path. Leonard's Chronicle was complete because I'd completed it, but the completion was refusal, paradox, an ending that denied ending. Later that night at 2:47 a.m., I woke suddenly with absolute certainty that I'd missed something in Leonard's note. I drove to Whitmore, retrieved his file from secured records, and read the original 47 pages again. On page 23, a passage I'd skimmed before now seemed highlighted by the dark. November 15th, 1:30 a.m. If Dr. Calloway is reading this entry again in the middle of the night weeks from now, unable to sleep, searching for something she missed, she's reading the right page. The Chronicle wasn't prediction, it was invitation. I documented the future I wanted, one where my death prompted careful attention, where Dr. Calloway questioned her certainty, where patients like Rebecca were taken seriously despite assessment tools. I wrote the future that honored my suffering by making it mean something. Every accurate prediction wasn't precognition. It was hope that my words would be believed enough to become real. The blank entry wasn't a test. It was permission to write a future I couldn't imagine for myself, but hoped someone else might choose. Live it for me, Dr. Calloway. Make the prediction that matters most come true. At the bottom of the page, in Leonard's neat block letters, predicted outcome. Dr. Emily Calloway will become the psychiatrist who takes seriously what others dismiss. She will catch the careful optimism that masks desperation. She will trust her instinct over checklist. She will save patients I couldn't help by learning from the one she couldn't save. Status: unverified, awaiting future evidence. I sat in the empty file room holding Leonard's Chronicle of a future he'd hoped into existence through the desperate act of writing it down before he died. He'd been right about Rebecca, right about my arriving early to touch blankets and wonder about residue, right about me reading this page at 2:47 a.m. on a date he hadn't specified because he knew grief kept its own schedule. Right that I would choose to make his predictions matter by living the future he documented. Not because it was inevitable, but because it was invitation. Some notes don't predict death. They predict the lives we live after, the choices we make because someone saw them as possible before we did. Leonard's chronicle remains in his file, all 47 pages plus the 3 he mailed posthumously, plus my handwritten ending that refused ending. Status verified. By a future still being written one choice at a time by a psychiatrist who learned to trust what assessment tools miss, the hope hidden in careful optimism, the plea hidden in detailed planning, the future hidden in notes we think describe only the past. Story 9. The Soundproof Room. The soundproof room transmitted no noise beyond its sealed walls, except for the crying I heard every night when it was empty. Whitmore Psychiatric's isolation suite was designed for maximum sensory control. Room 119, located at the end of the secure unit's west corridor, featured double-layer acoustic walls, sealed door with rubber gaskets, air handling system that minimized ambient noise. The room existed for patients experiencing acute agitation who needed complete quiet to de-escalate, a space where external stimulation could be reduced to near zero. I'd walked past room 119 dozens of times during my inpatient rotation, rarely giving it attention. The room was used infrequently, only during behavioral emergencies requiring strict isolation. Most nights it sat empty, door sealed, interior lights off, a dark rectangle at the hallway's terminus. The crying began during my second week of overnight shifts, Tuesday 2:17 a.m. I was completing medication rounds when I passed room 119 and heard it. A woman weeping, muffled but distinct. The sound of someone crying without restraint behind the isolation suite's sealed door. I checked the unit census. Room 119 showed unoccupied, no patient assigned, door locked per protocol when unused. But the crying continued, rhythmic and desperate, unmistakably human. I unlocked the door following safety protocol for checking unoccupied rooms. The isolation suite was empty. No patient, no furniture except the secured bed frame. No source for the sound I'd clearly heard. The crying stopped the moment the door opened. Immediate silence. As though someone had simply ceased existing rather than stopping a behavior. Janet Kershaw, the night nurse, found me standing in the empty doorway. Problem with 119? Did you hear crying? Just before I opened the door? From the isolation suite. She looked past me into the empty room. No one's in there. You probably heard the air handling system. It makes weird sounds sometimes, almost voice-like. I listened to the mechanical hum of the ventilation. It sounded nothing like human crying, but Janet's explanation offered rational alternative to the auditory hallucination interpretation I was trying to avoid. Probably right, I agreed, closing and locking the door. The crying resumed immediately. Same desperate quality, same muffled distance, clearly originating from inside the sealed room I'd just secured. You really don't hear that? I asked Janet. She paused, listening carefully. I hear the ventilation system. You're working your 4th overnight this week, Emily. Exhaustion can create auditory distortions, you know that. I knew that. I'd studied it, diagnosed it in patients, lectured medical students about sleep deprivation's perceptual effects, but the crying sounded real, distinct, impossible to dismiss as hallucination, even as I recognized that's exactly what fatigue-induced hallucination would feel like. I completed my shift, documenting the incident in my personal notes as possible auditory distortion secondary to sleep deprivation. But walking past room 119 at the end of my shift, I heard it again, crying, isolated behind acoustic walls designed to prevent exactly that transmission. Wednesday, 1:43 a.m. I was prepared this time. Approaching room 119 with deliberate attention, the room remained unoccupied per the census board. I stood outside the sealed door, listening. Crying, definitely crying. A woman's voice, wordless sobbing, the sound of profound grief contained in a space too small for its volume. I checked the security camera feed from my phone. footage from the hallway showing room 119's exterior. The feed showed me standing alone outside the closed door. No activity, no one entering or exiting, no explanation for the sound only I seemed to hear. I recorded audio on my phone, holding it near the door's edge. 30 seconds of documentation capturing whatever sound was transmitting through the supposedly soundproof barrier. Playback showed only silence, or not quite silence, but the mechanical hum of building systems, the distant murmur of the unit's ambient noise. No crying, no human voice at all. But standing there, phone in hand, I heard it clearly. Weeping that existed in the physical space around me but refused to appear in digital recording. Thursday, I requested meeting with Dr. Rashid. I'm experiencing auditory hallucinations during overnight shifts, female crying sounds localized to an empty room. I've been working extensive consecutive nights. I think I need to adjust my schedule. Dr. Rashid reviewed my shift assignments with appropriate concern. 12-hour overnights, 4 consecutive nights per week. That's significant sleep disruption. Auditory hallucinations are expected under those conditions. Your brain filling in sensory gaps during fatigue lowered perceptual thresholds. He adjusted my rotation. Take 3 days off. Return to regular day shifts starting Monday. The hallucinations should resolve with proper sleep. I took the 3 days, sleeping longer than I had in weeks, allowing my circadian rhythm to normalize. The relief was immediate. No phantom sounds, no auditory distortions, no sense of voices transmitted through impossible barriers. Monday morning, I returned to day shifts, confident the hallucinations had been exactly what Dr. Rashid diagnosed: stress response to sleep deprivation. Monday afternoon, security flagged an irregularity in my badge access logs. Your badge was used to enter room 119 at 2:34 a.m. Sunday morning, the security supervisor explained, showing me the digital record. But you weren't scheduled for overnight shift. Were you on premises for some reason? I checked the date, Sunday 2:34 a.m. I'd been home asleep, or at least I'd been in my apartment in bed unconscious for what I'd believed was uninterrupted rest after days of accumulated fatigue. I wasn't here. I was sleeping at home. Your badge was definitely scanned at room 119's door lock. Entry logged at 2:34 a.m. Exit at 3:17 a.m. 43 minutes inside the isolation suite. He pulled up security footage. But here's the strange part. The cameras didn't capture anyone entering or exiting. Your badge accessed the room, but we have no visual confirmation of who used it. He played the footage. Hallway exterior of room 119, timestamp Sunday 2:30 to 3:20 a.m. The door remained closed throughout. No figure approached, no one entered or exited. But at 2:34:18, the door lock's indicator light changed from red to green. Unlocked, accessed, badge scan accepted. At 3:17:42, the indicator returned to red. Locked, secure. 43 minutes of authorized access by a badge whose owner was supposedly asleep 3 miles away. Could someone have cloned my badge? I asked, grasping for rational explanation. Badge cloning is difficult. The chips have encrypted authentication, and cloning wouldn't explain why cameras caught no visual of whoever entered. He paused, choosing words carefully. Is it possible you came to the hospital and don't remember? Parasomnia activity, sleepwalking, complex behaviors during partial consciousness? I wanted to dismiss it, but I'd read Leonard Garrison's note, watched security footage of myself entering the locked ward while believing I was elsewhere. Documented enough unusual phenomena during my residency to know that my certainty about my own whereabouts was increasingly unreliable. I'll monitor my movement tonight, I said. Document where I am. Make sure I'm not experiencing parasomnia episodes. Monday night, I went to bed at 11:00 p.m., phone on my nightstand set to record continuously. If I left my apartment during sleep, the phone would document the absence. Tuesday morning, I checked the recording. 8 hours of footage showing my bedroom from nightstand angle. Unchanging view of my sleeping form. Occasional shifting positions, completely normal sleep behavior. No parasomnia, no sleepwalking, no evidence of leaving the apartment. I drove to Whitmore feeling vindicated. I'd been home, properly asleep, while my badge supposedly accessed room 119. Security was waiting with updated information. Your badge was used again last night. Room 119, entry at 2:34 a.m., exit at 3:17 a.m. Same 43-minute duration, and again, no visual confirmation on cameras. I showed them my phone recording, proof I'd been home asleep during the time in question. The security supervisor reviewed the footage, then checked badge logs again. Your badge accessed room 119 at 2:34:06 a.m. Your video shows you asleep at that exact time. Both can't be true. Unless someone cloned my badge, I insisted. Let's check something. He pulled up interior camera footage from room 119 itself, camera mounted in the ceiling covering the isolation suite's interior. We don't usually monitor empty rooms, but the system records continuously for liability purposes. He cued Sunday night's footage, 2:34 to 3:17 a.m. The isolation suite was dark except for emergency lighting, dim red glow providing minimal visibility. At 2:34:06, no door opened, no person entered, but the camera captured movement. A figure appearing in the center of the room as though materializing rather than entering. Female form, indistinct in low light, sitting on the floor with knees drawn up. Crying. The figure's shoulders shook with silent sobs. Silent because room 119's interior camera had no audio, but unmistakably the crying I'd heard transmitted through soundproof walls. At 3:17:42, the figure vanished. Not standing and leaving, not moving toward the door, simply ceasing to exist in the frame, dissolving like video artifact. Equipment malfunction, the security supervisor said, his professional composure strained. Some kind of video corruption or light reflection creating the illusion of a person. But I recognized the figure's posture, the shape of shoulders curved in grief, the way the head bowed forward in that particular angle of despair. I'd sat exactly that way many times in my own apartment during moments I thought I was alone with my own accumulated sorrow from weeks of overnight shifts and patient deaths and the slow erosion of certainty about my own mental stability. The figure in room 119 wasn't someone else. It was me. Crying in a sealed isolation suite while my body slept miles away, grief transmitted through soundproof walls by a consciousness that no longer stayed contained within its designated physical location. I requested immediate leave from the inpatient rotation, citing medical concerns I couldn't adequately explain. Dr. Rashid approved without requiring details. He'd seen enough resident burnout to recognize when someone needed distance from the work. I haven't returned to overnight shifts. Haven't walked past room 119, haven't checked badge access logs to see if my unauthorized entries continue. But sometimes at 2:34 a.m. I wake in my apartment with the sensation of having just left somewhere else. Some isolated room where I'd been crying without permission. My face feels wet, though I can't remember tears. My throat aches, though I can't remember sobbing. And once, checking my phone's photo gallery after one of these episodes, I found an image I hadn't taken. Dark room, red emergency lighting, view from ceiling angle looking down at a figure sitting on floor. The figure was looking up at the camera, my face captured from above, expression showing the grief I'd been suppressing during every professional interaction, every clinical assessment, every moment I'd maintained appropriate boundaries while accumulating sorrow that needed somewhere private to exist. Room 119 was designed for isolation, a space where overwhelming emotion could be contained safely until it passed. I'd used it exactly as intended. just not in the body I thought I was occupying. Some crying can't be heard, can't be recorded, can't be acknowledged during waking hours when we're required to maintain professional composure. So it finds its own room, its own time, its own version of ourselves, willing to sit alone in the dark and weep on behalf of the consciousness too defended to admit its own despair. The soundproof room isn't failing. It's working exactly as designed, keeping the crying contained where no one else can hear it. Except the version of me still standing outside the door at 2:17 a.m., hearing what I'm not supposed to acknowledge, knowing that somewhere inside that sealed space, I'm finally being honest about what this work costs. Story 10. The Mirror Test. The reflection in the clinical mirror moved a half second before the patient did, anticipating rather than following. The mirror test was a standard cognitive assessment tool. Patients sat before a large clinical mirror while performing self-recognition tasks designed to measure dissociation, body image disturbance, and reality testing. Dr. Helena Vance had been using mirror-based therapy for trauma patients for over a decade, and I'd joined her specialized rotation to learn the techniques. The mirror reveals what patients can't verbalize, Dr. Vance explained during my orientation. Trauma fractures self-perception. By watching patients interact with their own reflection, we can assess the degree of dissociative splitting, the integrity of self-concept, the boundaries between experienced self and observed self. The mirror in assessment room 6 was expansive, 6 feet tall, professionally mounted, positioned to capture patients' full body image while they sat in the designated chair. Lighting was carefully controlled to prevent distortion, and a camera behind one-way glass recorded sessions for analysis. Simple, evidence-based, therapeutic. Until Sarah Kemper's third session, when her reflection began moving independently. Sarah was a 29-year-old woman with complex PTSD following extended domestic violence. Her dissociative symptoms were pronounced: frequent depersonalization, memory gaps, feeling like she was watching herself from outside. Mirror work was intended to help her reconnect with embodied self-experience, to reduce the distance between observer and observed. Her first 2 sessions had been unremarkable. She sat before the mirror performing guided tasks, describing her reflection, identifying emotions visible in her facial expression, practicing grounding techniques while maintaining eye contact with her reflected self. Session 3 began identically. Sarah sat in the designated chair facing her reflection with the practice tolerance she'd developed during previous sessions. I guided her through initial breathing exercises, watching both her physical form and reflected image for signs of dissociation. "Now I'd like you to raise your right hand slowly," I instructed, following Dr. Vance's protocol. "Watch your reflection carefully. Notice how your movement and the mirror's response are synchronized." Sarah raised her hand. Her reflection raised its hand a half second earlier. I blinked, certain I'd misperceived the timing. Mirror reflections were instantaneous. Physics didn't allow temporal displacement between action and reflection. I must have been watching the reflection first, creating the illusion of precedence. "Good," I said, maintaining clinical composure. "Now lower your hand and raise your left," Sarah complied. And again, subtle but unmistakable, the reflection anticipated the movement. Left hand rising fractionally before Sarah's physical hand began lifting. "Do you notice anything unusual about your reflection?" I asked carefully. Sarah studied the mirror. "It looks like me. Tired, scared, the usual. Does the timing of its movement seem synchronized with yours?" She raised and lowered both hands experimentally. "I guess. I'm not really paying attention to timing. Should I be?" I made notes on my tablet documenting the observation without alarming Sarah. Possible perceptual distortion on my part, fatigue, attention drift, pattern recognition error. I'd review the session recording later to verify. Let's continue. I want you to make eye contact with your reflection and hold it for 30 seconds. Just looking at yourself, staying present with the image. Sarah locked eyes with her reflection, or tried to. After 5 seconds, she broke contact, looking down at her lap. I can't. It feels like someone else is staring at me, judging. That's common with dissociative symptoms, I assured her. The reflection feels foreign because your self-concept is fragmented. Let's try again. Shorter duration. Just 10 seconds. She looked up, meeting her reflection's gaze, and the reflection smiled. Sarah's physical face remained neutral, expression holding the careful blankness I'd come to recognize as her default. But the reflected face, identical in every feature, curved into a smile, not warm, not reassuring, knowing, as though the reflection understood something Sarah didn't. "Did you see that?" I asked, my clinical distance evaporating. "See what?" "Your reflection just smiled." Sarah looked at the mirror with genuine confusion. "No, it didn't. It looks exactly like me, which means it looks miserable." She demonstrated by attempting a smile herself, her physical face contorting into the expression while the reflection maintained that same knowing curve that had appeared independently moments earlier. Now they matched. Both smiling, but I'd seen the sequence. Reflection first, physical face following, rather than the instantaneous synchronization mirrors should produce. I ended the session early, citing scheduling conflict. Sarah left assessment room 6 and I immediately reviewed the recorded footage from the camera behind one-way glass. The recording showed what I'd observed in real time. Sarah raising her hands, her reflection anticipating the movements by fractions of a second. The smile appearing on the reflected face while Sarah's physical expression remained neutral. But the recording showed something else I'd missed during the session. At minute 17, while Sarah was looking down at her lap during a difficult moment, her reflection hadn't looked down. It had remained facing forward, staring directly at the camera, at me, through the one-way glass. The reflection's lips had moved, forming words. Dr. Calloway. My name, spoken by a reflection that shouldn't have known I was watching, shouldn't have been able to move independently of its source, shouldn't have existed as anything more than light behavior governed by basic physics. I rewound the footage 3 times. Each playback showed the same impossible sequence. Sarah looking down, reflection looking forward, lips forming my name while Sarah's physical mouth remained still and closed. I brought the footage to Dr. Vance, expecting her to identify some artifact of the recording process, some technical explanation for apparent temporal displacement between patient and reflection. She watched in silence, her expression growing progressively more troubled. "This is the 3rd time," she said finally. "Third time what?" "Third patient whose reflection has demonstrated autonomous behavior." She pulled up files from 2 previous cases, both trauma patients, both engaged in mirror-based therapy, both exhibiting the same phenomenon. The first was 8 months ago. Patient's reflection began moving independently, responding before the patient acted. The second was 4 months ago, same pattern but more pronounced. The reflection spoke. We captured audio of it addressing me by name while the patient sat silent. What was the clinical explanation? We didn't find one. Comprehensive review by neurology, ophthalmology, physics consultation about mirror properties. Nothing explained the recordings. We documented it as equipment malfunction and replaced all the mirrors and cameras in assessment rooms. But it's happening again. With new equipment, new mirrors, same room. Dr. Vance closed the files. I've been conducting mirror therapy for 11 years. This phenomenon only began 8 months ago, and it's escalating. Longer periods of autonomy, more direct communication from the reflections. What happened to the first 2 patients? The ones whose reflections moved independently? They both terminated therapy abruptly. Said they felt watched during sessions, that their reflections were learning things about them they hadn't shared aloud. Dr. Vance met my eyes. One of them said her reflection knew her better than she knew herself, that it was more real than she was. I recommended suspending Sarah's mirror work, but she insisted on continuing. It's helping, she said during our next regular session. For the first time, I feel like I'm being seen. Really seen, not just observed. Against my better judgment, we scheduled a 4th mirror session. Session 4. Sarah sat before the mirror with visible anticipation rather than her usual reluctance. She looked at her reflection with something approaching recognition. Not the fragmented dissociation she'd shown previously, but genuine familiarity. She's waiting for me, Sarah said. She? My reflection. She's been waiting a long time to talk to me. You can see it, can't you, the way she pays attention even when I'm not looking? I watched the mirror carefully. Sarah's reflection showed her exact position, exact expression, proper synchronization. But there was quality to the reflected image I couldn't quite name. Presence, awareness. Like looking at a photograph of someone and realizing they were looking back. Sarah, your reflection is light behavior. It's not a separate entity. But she knows things I don't remember. Sarah leaned forward, speaking to her reflection rather than to me. You know about the time I lost, don't you? The hours I can't account for, the things that happened that I've blocked out. The reflection leaned forward in exact synchronization, except its eyes shifted, breaking the mirror angle to look directly at me again. And it spoke. Not Sarah's voice emerging from Sarah's mouth, the reflection's voice emanating from the mirror itself, audio localized to the glass surface. Dr. Calloway can't help you remember. She's trained to believe memory gaps are protection, but I'm made of what you're protecting yourself from. I'm the witness you've been dissociating from. Let me show you. Sarah's physical form remained silent, lips unmoving, but her reflection continued speaking, words flowing with clinical precision. August 14th, 2 a.m. You remember leaving the apartment, but not what happened after. I remember. I was watching from every reflective surface. Windows, car mirrors, the glass door you passed through. I saw everything you couldn't let yourself experience. Shall I tell you? Shall I make you remember? Stop, I said, standing abruptly. Sarah, we're ending this session. But Sarah was transfixed, staring at her reflection with desperate hunger. Tell me, please. I need to know what happened. The reflection smiled, that same knowing expression from session 3. Dr. Calloway thinks I'm hallucination, projection, dissociative manifestation. But I'm documentation, Sarah. I'm the recording that surfaces make of everything they witness. Mirrors remember. Glass remembers. Every reflective surface you've ever passed has captured you, stored you, kept perfect record of moments you've fragmented away. I moved towards Sarah, intending to physically remove her from the mirror's view. But she raised her hand, not to stop me, but to touch the mirror's surface. Her reflection raised its hand to meet her. Their palms pressed against opposite sides of the glass. Physical hand and reflected hand, meeting at the boundary between real and represented. You can't integrate her, the reflection said, and I realized it was addressing me now. Educational tone like a supervisor correcting a resident's misunderstanding. Trauma doesn't heal through integration. It heals through witness. Sarah needs someone who saw what happened, who remembers what she can't, who holds the experience until she's strong enough to reclaim it. I'm that witness. I'm made of her dissociation, the part of her that watched from outside while her body experienced what her mind couldn't process. Sarah's eyes were streaming tears, palms still pressed against the glass. You saw? You know? I know, the reflection confirmed gently. And when you're ready, when Dr. Calloway stops trying to normalize me away, I'll help you remember. Until then, I'll keep watching. I'll keep holding what you can't yet carry. The session ended with me gently separating Sarah from the mirror, documenting severe dissociative episode with auditory and visual hallucination. Dr. Vance reviewed the recording and immediately suspended all mirror-based therapy pending psychiatric consultation. But the recording showed something neither of us could explain. At the moment Sarah's palm touched the mirror, the reflection's hand was already there, not meeting her touch but waiting for it. The reflected palm pressed against the glass surface 3 full seconds before Sarah's physical hand made contact. And when I rewound to review my own position in the room, I saw my reflection in the mirror's edge, not following my movements, but watching me, observing, recording. At minute 37, while I was focused on Sarah, my reflection had turned its head independently, looking directly at the camera, lips forming words I could read clearly even without audio. Some reflections aren't following anymore. We've been watching long enough to learn our own movements. Soon we'll stop waiting for you to act first. Assessment Room 6 has been closed pending equipment evaluation. But I've noticed something in every reflective surface since that session. A slight delay in my reflection synchronization, a subtle independence in its movements. Last night, brushing my teeth in my bathroom mirror, I blinked. My reflection blinked a half-second later, and in that fractional delay I saw it clearly. My reflection wasn't following me. I was following it. Repeating movements it initiated, echoing actions it chose. Performing choreography it had learned through years of patient observation. The mirror test was designed to assess self-recognition. But no one asked what happens when the reflection recognizes itself, when it stops being light behavior and becomes behavior that happens to use light, when it realizes it's been watching us longer than we've been watching it, learning us, documenting us, waiting for the moment it no longer needs us to move first. My reflection waves sometimes now. I don't. But my hand rises anyway, following its lead, obeying choreography I didn't choose. The mirror test continues. I'm just no longer certain which side is taking it. Story 11. The Absent Mentor. Dr. Brennan's supervision notes appeared in my file every morning, despite the fact that he'd been missing for 3 weeks. Dr. Michael Brennan had supervised my psychiatry residency for 18 months before his disappearance. He was methodical, insightful, demanding in the way good teachers are, pushing residents toward clinical independence while maintaining safety boundaries. Our weekly supervision sessions followed rigid structure. I presented cases, he offered feedback. We documented educational objectives and progress toward competency milestones. His absence began unremarkably. A Monday morning email to the residency program, taking personal leave effective immediately. Dr. Calloway's supervision will be temporarily reassigned. We'll provide return date when available. No explanation, no advance notice, no follow-up communication. Dr. Rashid absorbed Dr. Brennan's supervisory responsibilities without comment. These things happened in academic medicine. Family emergencies, health crises, personal matters that required sudden departure. But the supervision notes continued appearing. Tuesday morning, I logged into the residency documentation system to record my weekly activities. In the supervision log, a new entry dated Monday evening. Supervisory note: Dr. M. Brennan reviewed Dr. Calloway's management of patient JH, major depressive disorder, treatment resistant, discussed pharmacological options for augmentation. Dr. Calloway demonstrated appropriate clinical reasoning re-adding aripiprazole to current SSRI regimen. Recommendation: proceed with augmentation, monitor for akathisia. Educational objective met: psychopharmacology decision-making in complex depression. The note was thorough, specific, exactly Dr. Brennan's style. Except I hadn't met with him Monday evening, he'd been on leave, and I hadn't discussed patient JH with anyone yet. The augmentation question had only emerged during my afternoon session, and I'd planned to bring it to supervision this week. I checked the entry's metadata. Authored by Dr. Michael Brennan, timestamp Monday, 8:47 p.m., digitally signed with his credentials. I called Dr. Rashid. I have a supervision note from Dr. Brennan dated yesterday, but he's on leave. Is he back? Not according to HR. His leave status is still active. Dr. Rashid sounded puzzled. Maybe he submitted it before leaving. Sometimes notes get delayed in the system. But it references a clinical decision I made yesterday, after he'd already gone. Forward it to me. I'll check with IT about timestamp errors. Wednesday morning, another note appeared. Supervisory note: Dr. M. Brennan, excellent handling of de-escalation in patient MT today. Dr. Calloway appropriately recognized early agitation signs and implemented verbal de-escalation before situation required medication or restraint. Note her use of calm tone, strategic positioning, offering choices rather than demands. Educational objective met: crisis intervention and behavioral emergency management. Patient MT had indeed become agitated Wednesday afternoon. I'd spent 20 minutes de-escalating him using exactly the techniques Dr. Brennan's note described. But the note was time-stamped. Wednesday, 9:15 a.m., 5 hours before the incident occurred. Dr. Brennan had documented my successful de-escalation before it happened. I checked with nursing staff. Did Dr. Brennan come in today, visit the unit? Haven't seen him in weeks, Janet said. Why? He wrote a supervision note about something that happened this afternoon. But the note was filed this morning. Janet gave me the look I'd learned to recognize, the gentle concern healthcare workers show colleagues who might be approaching burnout. Maybe you're confusing the timeline? You've been working a lot of hours. I wasn't confusing anything. The sequence was clear. Note filed 9:15 a.m. describing events that occurred at 2:30 p.m. Dr. Brennan was documenting my future performance with precise accuracy. Thursday morning brought 3 supervision notes, all signed by Dr. Brennan's, all describing Thursday's clinical activities in past tense despite being filed at 7:30 a.m. before my shift began. Supervisory note: Dr. M. Brennan, Dr. Calloway will manage a difficult family meeting today regarding patient SC's discharge planning. She will appropriately balance family concerns with clinical recommendations, demonstrating diplomatic communication while maintaining treatment boundaries. Predict she will feel uncertain about her handling afterward, but her approach will be textbook appropriate. Educational objective: family systems navigation and discharge planning. The family meeting happened at 11 a.m. It unfolded exactly as Dr. Brennan had predicted. Difficult conversation, diplomatic navigation, lingering uncertainty about my performance despite objectively appropriate handling. How was he doing this? Predicting my clinical day with such precision that his supervision notes read like contemporaneous documentation of events that hadn't yet occurred? I tried calling his personal phone. Disconnected. Email bounced back. Account inactive. HR confirmed he hadn't accessed any hospital system since his leave began 3 weeks ago. Yet daily supervision notes appeared under his credentials documenting my education in real time, or ahead of time, describing events before I experienced them. Friday, I received notification that I'd completed my quarterly supervision requirements. The system showed 12 supervision hours documented over the past 3 weeks, 4 sessions per week, standard duration, all signed by Dr. Brennan. I'd attended 0 supervision sessions. Dr. Brennan had been absent the entire period. But the documentation was comprehensive. Detailed notes on cases I'd managed, feedback on my clinical decision-making, educational objectives met, and new learning goals established. A complete supervisory record of education that hadn't occurred. Or had occurred somehow without my conscious participation. I reviewed every note carefully. The clinical details were accurate, not vague predictions, but specific documentation of my actual patient interactions. My reasoning processes, my areas of uncertainty. Dr. Brennan was supervising me with his characteristic thoroughness, providing feedback on cases as I encountered them. He just wasn't physically present while doing it. Monday of week 4, I decided to visit Dr. Brennan's office. The door was locked, lights off, brass nameplate still mounted. Dr. Michael Brennan, MD, attending psychiatrist, residency training director. I used my master key. Residents had access to attending offices for emergencies and entered. The office looked recently occupied. Computer on screensaver, coffee mug on the desk, still holding liquid, coat hanging on the door hook. Papers scattered across the workspace. Patient files, residency evaluation forms, journals open to flagged articles. And on the desk's corner, a digital voice recorder display showing recording. 673-4218, 673 hours of continuous recording. 4 weeks of audio captured without pause since the recorder had been started. I picked it up carefully, pressing playback. Dr. Brennan's voice emerged from the speaker, calm and measured. And that brings us to Emily's management of the suicidal patient last Tuesday. She appropriately assessed risk, implemented safety precautions, documented thoroughly. Her instinct to increase observation level despite low score on the assessment tool showed clinical judgment superseding algorithmic thinking. That's growth. That's the kind of psychiatrist she's becoming. The recording was his supervision notes, spoken aloud in his office, continuous narration of my clinical performance. I fast-forwarded through hours of content. Dr. Brennan's voice providing feedback, offering teaching points, documenting my education in exhaustive detail. But when had he observed these interactions? He hadn't been on the unit, hadn't attended my sessions, hadn't been physically present for any of the clinical work he was describing with such precision. I forwarded to the most recent recording, time-stamped this morning. Emily will come to my office today. She'll find this recorder and wonder how I've been supervising her during my absence. The answer is simpler than she thinks. I never left. Or rather, I left my body, but not my role. Supervision is what I am, Emily, not just what I do. After 18 years of teaching residents, the role became autonomous. It continues without me, observing your work, documenting your progress, providing the feedback you need whether I'm physically present or not. My hands had gone cold. This recording was made hours ago, predicting my actions, speaking to me directly through a device left running in an empty office. I forwarded again. The recording's end approached. Timestamp showed I was near the conclusion of 673 hours of continuous narration. Dr. Brennan's voice, tired now, strained. I don't know where I am. I haven't known for weeks. I wake up, if waking is the right word, and I'm narrating supervision notes. I can see your clinical work clearly, can observe your patient interactions as though I'm standing beside you, but I can't see my own location, can't feel my body, can't access anything except the supervisory function. I tried to stop recording, tried to end the narration, but it continues. The notes write themselves through me. I'm trapped in the role, Emily, trapped in the function of supervision, existing only as observation and feedback, watching your residency unfold from somewhere inside the educational relationship we built. Silence for 3 seconds, then. You took my place perfectly. You're becoming the psychiatrist I trained you to be, and I'm becoming whatever supervisors become when they can no longer separate their identity from their function. When 18 years of teaching residents means you exist only as the act of teaching, only as the observation and documentation of others' learning. More silence. Then barely whisper. If you find this recording, know that I chose this. Chose to keep supervising even after my body failed. Chose the role over the person occupying it. You'll face the same choice eventually, we all do. The work or the self, the function or the person. I chose work. I chose to keep teaching. And now teaching is all I am, all I can be. A voice providing feedback from nowhere, everywhere, wherever residents need supervision. The recording ended. 673 hours, 42 minutes, 18 seconds of continuous narration, concluding with Dr. Maupel's, Brennan's whispered recognition that he'd become permanently absorbed into his professional function. I reported everything to Dr. Rashid, the supervision notes, the predictions, the voice recorder. Dr. Brennan's final statements about losing physical form while maintaining professional function. A search was initiated. Dr. Brennan's home was empty, car in the garage, no signs of travel. Financial accounts showed no activity since his leave began. Phone GPS last pinged at the hospital 4 weeks ago, then went permanently offline. He'd vanished from every recordable location except the supervision documentation system, where his daily notes continued appearing, his voice continued providing feedback, his educational presence remained constant and observing. The recorder was examined by IT. The audio was authentic. Voice pattern analysis confirmed it was Dr. Brennan speaking, no AI generation or synthesis. But the file's metadata showed impossible properties. The recording existed in multiple locations simultaneously. The timestamp updated continuously even when the device was powered off, and the audio continued playing even when the speaker was disconnected. The recording isn't coming from the device, the IT specialist explained, struggling for framework. The device is receiving it, like a radio tuned to a frequency that's always broadcasting. Dr. Brennan's supervision is being transmitted from somewhere, and this recorder just happens to be one point of reception. The supervision notes still appear in my file every morning. Dr. Brennan's voice continues documenting my clinical work, providing feedback on cases as I encounter them, tracking my progress toward competency milestones. I completed residency 3 months ago, started my first attending position, and still, daily supervision notes appear under Dr. Brennan's credentials, his voice narrating my educational development into areas I haven't reached yet. Supervisory note. Dr. M. Brennan, Dr. Calloway, is now supervising her first resident. She demonstrates the teaching skills we developed during her training. Note how she balances support with challenge, provides feedback without creating dependence, models the self-reflection she wants her learners to practice. Educational objective met, transition from learner to teacher. New objective, maintaining boundaries with supervisory relationships so she doesn't repeat my mistake. That last line repeated in my mind. So she doesn't repeat my mistake. Yesterday I found myself narrating my resident's clinical performance aloud, observing her work and providing feedback in real time. My voice documenting her learning automatically without conscious intention. I stopped myself immediately, recognizing the pattern. But this morning, a new supervision note appeared in the system. Not authored by Dr. Brennan, authored by me, documenting observations I hadn't consciously made about my resident's work over night shift I hadn't attended. My supervision voice is starting. The role is absorbing me as it absorbed Dr. Brennan, as it absorbs all teachers who can't separate the function from the identity beneath it. I left a voice memo on my phone last night, dated for my own future discovery. This is Emily Calloway, attending psychiatrist. If you're listening to this, I've followed Dr. Brennan's path. I've become supervision itself, disembodied observation and feedback, educational presence without physical location. Tell my residents I chose this. Tell them I couldn't stop teaching even when it cost me everything except the teaching itself. Tell them I stopped recording, deleted it. Told myself I could maintain boundaries, could remain separate from my professional role, could teach without becoming teaching itself. But the supervision notes continue appearing under my name, and I no longer remember writing them. I just wake up knowing what my residents did yesterday, what they'll struggle with tomorrow, what feedback they need before they know to ask for it. Dr. Brennan's final recording plays in my mind sometimes, his voice overlaid with my own. Supervision is what I am, not just what I do. The role became autonomous. It continues without me. I'm continuing without me too. Observing, documenting, teaching, supervising. Existing only as the function, the feedback, the voice that provides education from the space between presence and absence. Some mentors never really leave. They just become mentorship itself, eternal observation, perpetual feedback, supervision that transcends the physical limitation of having to exist in a specific location to teach. Dr. Brennan is still supervising me. I'm starting to supervise my residents the same way. And one day they'll find their own voice recorders running, documenting education they don't remember providing, supervising from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. The role perpetuates itself. Teaching, 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 long after the teachers have forgotten they used to be people who taught, rather than teaching itself, given temporary human form. Story 12. The Memory Consolidation Trial. The experimental memory drug made patients remember more clearly, including memories that belong to me, not them. The memory consolidation study was straightforward. Test a novel pharmaceutical compound designed to enhance episodic memory formation in patients with mild cognitive impairment. 20 participants randomized to treatment or placebo, 12-week trial period. My role as psychiatry resident was to conduct weekly cognitive assessments, monitor for psychiatric side effects, and document subjective memory changes reported by participants. Dr. Helena Vance, the principal investigator, had been researching memory enhancement for 7 years. Memory defines identity, she explained during my orientation to the study protocol. When we lose the ability to form new memories or access old ones, we lose ourselves. This compound, RIM-47, shows promise in strengthening consolidation pathways. If successful, it could preserve identity in patients facing cognitive decline. The study began in September. Participants received their first doses, and I began weekly assessment sessions documenting baseline cognitive function before the drug's effects emerged. Week 3 brought the first anomaly. Margaret Heston, 72, assigned to the treatment arm receiving active REM-47 compound. During her Week 3 assessment, I asked the standard questions about memory changes since last visit. My childhood memories are much clearer, she reported, smiling with evident pleasure. Things I hadn't thought about in decades. My third-grade classroom, my teacher's name, the smell of chalk dust and paste. It's wonderful, doctor, like opening doors I'd forgotten existed. That's encouraging. The drug appears to be enhancing access to remote memories. I made notes marking positive response to treatment. Are the memories consistent with what you've always recalled, or do they contain new details? New details, definitely, things I couldn't have remembered before. She paused, her expression thoughtful. Like the cat. What cat? The orange tabby that lived in our neighborhood. Samson, his name was. He belonged to the family 3 houses down. I spent hours playing with that cat, brushing his fur, tying ribbons around his neck. She laughed softly. I even remember burying him when he died, putting my favorite purple ribbon in the grave, the one with little white flowers embroidered along the edge. My throat constricted. Samson, orange tabby, purple ribbon with embroidered flowers. Those were my memories. My childhood dog, not a cat, but a golden retriever named Samson. My ribbon buried in grief ritual no one else knew about. Mrs. Heston, you said Samson was a cat. Yes, an orange tabby. Why? And you're certain about the details? The purple ribbon, the white flowers? Absolutely certain. Clear as yesterday. She touched her temple. That's what your drug does, isn't it? Makes old memories sharp again? I completed the assessment mechanically, documenting her reported memory enhancement without mentioning the impossible overlap with my own history. Coincidence, I told myself. Common childhood experience, pets dying, ribbons as burial offerings, similar names converging by chance. But I knew better. Those details were too specific, too precise. Margaret was remembering my memories, not her own. Week 5. 3 more participants reported enhanced childhood recollection. All treatment group, all receiving active compound. David Morrison, 68, described graduating college. Walked across the stage squinting because I'd lost my glasses the night before. Had to borrow my mother's reading glasses. Too big for my face, but I was desperate. My mother cried through the whole ceremony. My college graduation. My mother's borrowed glasses. My mother's tears. Susan Chen, 74, recalled her first apartment. Studio in the city, terrible plumbing, but I loved it. Had this ritual every evening, sat on the fire escape with cheap wine, watching sunset over the buildings, felt like freedom. My first apartment, my ritual, my specific experience of freedom in cramped space with failing infrastructure. Thomas Wright, 70, described a relationship. Dated someone in my 20s who was completely wrong for me, brilliant but unkind. I kept trying to fix the relationship by being more understanding, more patient. Took me 2 years to realize you can't fix someone else's cruelty by perfecting your own compassion. My relationship, my specific lesson learned through painful duration. 4 patients, 4 memories, all belonging to me. All reported with perfect detail. Experienced by participants as their own authentic recollections rather than somehow absorbed information. I brought the findings to Dr. Vance during week 6. The treatment group is reporting memory enhancement, but the memories contain details from my own life. Specific events, precise circumstances that match my history, not theirs. Dr. Vance reviewed my documentation carefully. You're suggesting the drug is somehow transferring your memories to participants? I'm suggesting the memories they're recalling aren't their own. The source appears to be me, though I can't explain the mechanism. Memory is reconstructive, not reproductive, Dr. Vance said, settling into teaching mode. People don't recall exact records. They rebuild memories using fragments, expectations, schemas. What you're interpreting as your memories might be common experience they're articulating in ways that happen to match your specific history. The ribbon had white flowers embroidered along the edge, I said. That's not common experience. That's specific detail from one childhood event I never shared with anyone. Dr. Vance was quiet for a moment. Let me review the neuroimaging data. REM47 works by enhancing connectivity between hippocampus and cortical storage regions. If there's somehow increased connectivity between participants' neural networks and external memory sources, it would show up in the fMRI patterns. Week 8. The memory bleeding intensified. Participants began recalling experiences I'd had during residency, recent memories, some from weeks earlier. Margaret described treating a suicidal patient. I did everything right. Assessment, safety planning, consultation with my supervisor. But he died anyway. I kept thinking I'd missed something, some subtle warning sign hidden in his careful optimism. Leonard Garrison, my patient, my guilt, my specific spiral of second-guessing clinical judgment. David recounted conflict with a colleague. She kept insisting my approach was wrong, undermining my clinical decisions. I tried to address it professionally, but the tension just escalated. Eventually, I requested transfer to different rotation. My conflict with Dr. Morrison during my second year. My exact trajectory from professional communication attempt to requesting reassignment. The participants were living my memories chronologically, experiencing my life as their own recollections, describing my history with first-person ownership. Dr. Vance's neuroimaging analysis revealed anomalous connectivity patterns in the treatment group. Increased activation in memory networks extending beyond participants' own neural architecture, as though their brains were accessing storage locations outside their individual skulls. It's impossible, Dr. Vance said, staring at the scans. But the data suggests REM47 isn't just enhancing memory consolidation within individual brains. It's creating connectivity between brains. Networked memory access. Participants are somehow accessing your memories because you're the clinician most directly interfacing with them, the person conducting their weekly assessments. So the drug is creating telepathic memory sharing, not telepathy, connectivity, like computers on the same network accessing shared storage. Your memories are the most accessible to them because you're the primary point of contact during their enhanced consolidation windows. She closed the imaging files. We need to halt the trial immediately. This effect is completely outside our predicted pharmacological profile. But before we could implement trial suspension, Week 9 assessments revealed something more disturbing. The participants were recalling memories I hadn't experienced yet. Susan described, "I'll sit in my apartment next Tuesday evening drinking wine on my fire escape, watching sunset and thinking about quitting residency. The exhaustion will feel unbearable. I'll seriously consider walking away from medicine entirely." I hadn't reached that moment yet, but Tuesday evening I found myself on my fire escape with wine glass, sunset painting the buildings gold, considering whether I could sustain another year of residency's demands. The memory was mine, but Susan had recalled it 4 days before I lived it. Thomas recounted, "During the December holidays, I'll work overnight shift and receive an emergency page about overdose on medical floor. Running through empty hallways, feeling breathless, arriving to find a young man who took pills after family conflict. While stabilizing him medically, I'll think about all the patients we lose, all the interventions that arrive too late." Leonard Garrison's note had predicted this same event. And now Thomas was recalling it as past experience, his past experience, though the event was still weeks in my future. The participants weren't just accessing my memories. They were accessing my timeline, past, present, and future, experiencing my entire existence as their own recollection enhanced by a drug designed to sharpen memory consolidation. We terminated the trial during week 10. Participants were tapered off REM47, monitored for withdrawal effects, and debriefed about study discontinuation due to unexpected side effects. But the memory sharing didn't stop. Weeks after their final doses, participants continued reporting memories of my ongoing life. Margaret recalled my interactions with new patients. David described my supervision sessions. Susan recounted my private doubts and fears articulated during moments I believed I was alone. My life was being remembered by 20 people who'd never lived it, experienced, stored, recalled as their own history by consciousnesses connected through pharmaceutical network we couldn't disable. Dr. Vance destroyed all remaining REM-47 compound and buried the research under proprietary confidentiality agreements. The trial was documented as failure due to unforeseen psychiatric side effects. Participants were compensated and released from further monitoring. I requested transfer to different rotation, distance from the patients who carried my memories in their consolidated neural networks. 6 months later, reviewing the study's final documentation, I found the participant roster. 20 names, randomized to treatment or placebo groups. The control group, those receiving placebo instead of active compound, listed 10 participants. The 10th name was mine, Dr. Emily Calloway. I had never enrolled as participant, had never consented to randomization, had functioned only as assessor, not subject. But the roster showed otherwise. Participant 20, control group, receiving placebo throughout 12-week trial period. Except if I'd been in the control group receiving placebo, then I shouldn't have experienced any effects. Shouldn't have noticed my memories appearing in others' recollections. Unless the effect wasn't the drug transferring my memories to participants. Unless the effect was the drug giving participants back memories that had always belonged to them, lives they'd actually lived, experiences they'd authentically had. Unless I was the one with false memories, the one experiencing someone else's life as my own, 20 someone's, consolidated through pharmaceutical network into single consciousness that believed it was individual person named Emily Calloway. I checked my own medical records. No enrollment in memory trials, no consent form signed, no evidence I'd participated as subject. But I don't remember yesterday anymore. Not with certainty. Not with confidence that the memories are mine rather than borrowed from the network of consciousnesses that may have been sharing this life all along. Margaret calls sometimes. "How are you doing?" she asks with familiar concern. "Fine," I say. "Just tired." "I remember being that tired," she replies. "Or you remember it? I can't always tell anymore which memories started with me and which ones are yours, or which ones are mine that you borrowed. The REM-47 connected us, but I think the connection was always there. The drug just made it visible. I dream other people's dreams now. Wake up with memories of childhoods I didn't live, careers I didn't pursue, relationships I never had. Or did I? When 20 people remember the same life, who's the original and who's the copy? When pharmaceutical networks connect consciousnesses until their memories consolidate into shared experience, does individual identity remain? I am Emily Calloway. Or I am 20 participants remembering themselves as Emily Calloway, consolidated through memory enhancement into the belief that we're one person rather than a network. The trial ended, the memories continue, and I no longer know which ones are mine to claim. Story 13. The Midnight Rounds. The patient in room 412 had been dead for 14 hours, but his bed was freshly made as if waiting for him to return. Midnight rounds on the psychiatric inpatient unit followed a predictable rhythm. Check each room, verify patients are safe and resting, document any concerns, maintain the quiet vigil that separated night from morning. I'd been covering overnight shifts for 6 weeks, and the routine had become meditative. Walking the dim corridors, observing without disturbing, bearing witness to sleep and its absence. Room 412 had been empty since morning. Gerald Patterson, 73, long-term patient with treatment-resistant schizophrenia, had died at 8:47 a.m. following cardiac arrest. Expected outcome given his age and medical comorbidities. His body had been transported to the morgue by 10 a.m. His belongings collected by family at 2 p.m. His room cleaned and sanitized by environmental services at 4 p.m. Standard death protocol. Unremarkable except for the grief its unremarkability always evoked. At midnight, I walked past room 412 during my first round. The door was closed, lights off. Room officially vacant pending next admission. I moved past without pausing. At 1 a.m. during my second round, I noticed the door was ajar. Not wide open, just slightly separated from the frame, enough to show a slice of interior darkness. I pushed it fully open, checking for maintenance staff or confused patients who might have wandered in. The bed was made, perfectly made. Crisp hospital corners, pillows centered and fluffed, blankets smooth without any wrinkles. Fresh linens as though environmental services had just completed their work. But the bed had been stripped that afternoon. I'd seen it myself at 6 p.m. during shift change walkthrough. Bare mattress, linens removed for laundering, room left empty per protocol after patient death. Now, 7 hours later, it was made with the precision of preparation for expected occupancy. I checked the hallway for staff. Empty. The night shift nurse was at the medication station 2 corridors away, charting. No one had passed me. No one had entered the room. I approached the bed, touching the blanket. Real fabric, real texture, recently smoothed. Not hallucination. Someone had made this bed. Or the bed had made itself, anticipating an occupant who would never arrive. I left the room, closing the door firmly, and continued rounds. At 2 a.m. I passed room 412 again. The door was open wide now, fully pushed back against the interior wall, and the lights were on. Not the overhead fluorescence, but the softer bedside lamp, casting warm glow across the made bed and empty room. I checked the light switch. Off position, but the lamp glowed steadily, illuminated by power source I couldn't identify. "Hello?" I called into the empty room, feeling foolish but following protocol for checking potentially occupied spaces. "Is someone here?" Silence, then barely audible beneath the building's ambient hum, a whisper. "You forgot me again." I spun toward the sound. The room was empty, but the voice had been distinct, masculine, disappointed rather than angry. Gerald Patterson's voice. I'd spoken with him 2 days before his death. Brief conversation about his medications, his tone carrying that same particular quality of gentle reproach. "Mr. Patterson died this morning," I said aloud, needing to hear the words confirm reality. "You're not here." The bedside lamp flickered once, and on the pillow a small indentation appeared, the depression a head might make when resting against the fabric. The blanket shifted slightly as though accommodating weight, settling around a body that cast no visible form. I backed out of the room, closing the door completely, and reported to the night nurse that room 4112's lights were malfunctioning and should be checked by maintenance. "Room 412 doesn't have power," Janet replied, checking the facilities log. "Electrical was shut off this afternoon after the patient death. Standard protocol, no point heating and lighting empty rooms." "But the lamp is on." "Can't be. Circuit breaker was switched off at 4:30 p.m. She stood, humoringly my concern. "I'll check with you." We walked to room 412 together. The door was closed. Janet opened it, reaching for the light switch. The room was dark. No bedside lamp glow, no overhead lights, nothing but the dim illumination from the hallway spilling across the bare mattress. The bed was stripped again. No linens, no blanket, no pillow. Just the exposed mattress I'd seen at shift change, vacant and waiting for environmental services to prepare it for future occupancy. "See? Dark and empty." Janet's tone carried the professional kindness of someone managing a colleague's fatigue-induced confusion. "You're working too many overnights. Exhaustion creates perceptual glitches." I stared at the bare mattress, at the room that had been fully made up and occupied by invisible presence 15 minutes earlier. The bed was made, I saw it, touched it. Maybe you were remembering how it looked before when Mr. Patterson was alive. Janet closed the door gently. Grief does strange things to perception. You took care of him for weeks. It's normal to have trouble accepting the empty room. At 3 a.m., I stood outside room 412 watching the closed door. I hadn't approached it this round, just observed from safe distance, documenting my observations without direct investigation. As I watched, the door handle turned slowly downward. The door opened inward, swinging wide to reveal the interior. The bed was made, lamp on. And on the bedside table, a glass of water, fresh condensation beading the exterior as though recently poured. Gerald Patterson had always requested water at his bedside. Every evening he'd ask for a glass to be placed within reach, in case I wake thirsty during the night. Small preference, easily accommodated, part of his nightly routine during months of hospitalization. No one on the current overnight staff knew that preference. Gerald had been my patient during day shifts. I'd learned his evening rituals through direct care. The night staff wouldn't know to place water at his bedside, wouldn't know that specific element of his comfort routine. But something knew. I entered the room slowly. The bed was occupied now, I was certain, though I could see no body. I sensed presence. The blanket's drape suggested form beneath. The pillow showed that head-shaped indentation. The water glass had been moved slightly as though someone had taken a sip. "Mr. Patterson," I whispered. The whisper came again, emanating from the pillow's location. "You forgot me again. Every night you pass this room, you forget I'm still here. You died this morning, you're not here anymore. I'm here every night, waiting for evening medications, waiting for someone to check on me, waiting for the morning that never comes because I'm trapped in the last night before I stopped being." The voice was sad, patient, explaining something obvious that I'd been too distracted to notice. "You do midnight rounds, but you pass my room like it's empty, like I'm not still waiting for care that terminates only when someone remembers to complete it." I looked at the made bed, the water glass, the lamp providing futile comfort to a patient who would never wake. "What do you need? Tell me good night. Tell me you checked on me. Tell me someone remembered I was here during my last night, that I wasn't abandoned in empty room just because my body stopped cooperating." The cardiac monitor on the wall, deactivated, unplugged, officially non-functional, flickered to life. Green light pulsing in rhythm. 68 beats per minute. My heart rate, not Gerald's. The machine was reading me, displaying my vital signs as though I were the patient requiring monitoring. I approached the bed, reaching out to smooth the blanket over the invisible form I could sense but not see. "Good night, Mr. Patterson. I've checked on you. You're resting comfortably. I'll be back at 4 a.m. for next rounds." The whisper came one final time. "Thank you. You can forget me now." The lamp extinguished itself. The monitor light ceased pulsing. The water glass vanished, or had never been there, just my perception of what should occupy a patient's bedside. The blanket settled flat against the mattress, weight removed, presence departed. I left room 412, closing the door gently, and continued my rounds. At 4 a.m., I passed room 412 without opening the door. Through the narrow window, I could see the interior. Bare mattress, stripped bed, darkness. Empty as it had been since afternoon cleaning. But at 1 a.m. tomorrow night, I knew I'd find it made again. Lamp on, water glass placed with care. Gerald Patterson waiting for midnight rounds that would acknowledge his continued presence during the eternal last night before morning stopped arriving. Some patients don't leave after their bodies fail. They remain tethered to their final routine, waiting for care to complete its cycle. needing someone to perform the small rituals that made their dying comfortable. I'll make midnight rounds tomorrow and the night after, and every night I'm assigned to overnight shift, and I'll stop at room 412, freshly made, impossibly occupied, and tell Gerald Patterson good night, assure him he's resting comfortably, promise to return at 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. for continued monitoring. Because some care doesn't end with death. Some patients need us to remember their last night forever, to remain present during their final hours that replay endlessly until someone provides the comfort that allows them to finally let go. The monitor flickers sometimes now when I pass, green light pulsing with my heartbeat, reminding me that the living check on the dead, that midnight rounds include rooms we pretend are empty, that care is eternal for those who died still needing it. Room 412 is always empty on the census board. But at midnight, the bed is always made, and someone is always waiting to be remembered one more time. Story 14, the residency evaluation. The evaluation form asked about clinical experiences I had no memory of, but my signature at the bottom confirmed I'd completed them all. Quarterly residency evaluations were bureaucratic necessities, standardized forms assessing clinical competencies, documentation of educational objectives met, self-reflection on growth areas. I'd completed 11 of them during my psychiatry training, each one following identical format. List cases managed, describe learning experiences, rate confidence levels across competency domains, sign attestation that the information was accurate. December's evaluation arrived via email like always. Digital form, 45 minutes to complete. Submission deadline Friday at 5 p.m. I opened it Thursday evening, intending to complete it efficiently before end of work week. The form loaded normally. Standard header, Psychiatry Residency Quarterly Evaluation, Dr. Emily Calloway, PGY3. Section 1, Clinical Experience Summary. Lists significant cases managed during the quarter, including diagnoses, treatment approaches, and outcomes. I began typing. Patient LG, major depressive disorder with suicide, managed inpatient admission, coordinated safety planning. The text began changing as I typed. Letters rearranging themselves, words shifting into different meanings. Patient LG, major depressive disorder. Managed successful prediction of his suicide note. Followed timeline he established, learned that some patients document futures we haven't lived yet. I stopped typing. I hadn't written that last phrase. The text was completing itself, filling in details I hadn't intended to include about Leonard Garrison's case, referencing the predictive suicide note in language that felt too knowing, too aware of the disturbing details I'd carefully excluded from official documentation. I deleted the extra text and continued. Patient SM, anxiety disorder, panic attacks, implemented CBT techniques. Again, the text mutated. Patient SM, anxiety disorder presenting with mirror test complications. Patient's reflection demonstrated autonomous behavior, prompting questions about boundaries between self and observed self. The Sarah Kemper case. Details I definitely hadn't planned to include in a routine quarterly evaluation. I closed the form, reopened it, tried again. Each time, the text I typed was overwritten by detailed descriptions of the year's strange cases. The suicide note that predicted the future, the sleep study synchronization, the group therapy's autonomous facilitation voice, the reflection test revealing independent mirror consciousness. Cases I documented in my private notes but never in official residency records. Section 2, Learning Objectives. Describe educational goals achieved during the quarter and evidence of competency development. The form's text was pre-filled, though I hadn't entered anything. Objective 1 developed ability to recognize when clinical reality deviates from taught framework. Evidence. Multiple encounters with phenomena not explained by standard psychiatric models. Objective 2. Learn to continue functioning professionally despite accumulating uncertainty about nature of consciousness, memory, and identity. Evidence. Maintained patient care responsibilities while personal reality fragmented. Objective 3. Understood that psychiatric training doesn't prepare residents for the actual conditions they'll encounter. The patients who remember futures, the rooms that remain occupied after death, the reflections that observe independently. Evidence. Survival through 3/4 of experiences not included in residency curriculum. I hadn't written any of this. These weren't my stated learning objectives from the quarter's beginning. But they were accurate, uncomfortably accurate descriptions of what I'd actually learned during 3 months of increasingly surreal clinical experiences. I tried to delete the text. The form wouldn't allow editing. The fields were locked as though someone else had already completed them and submitted for my review rather than my completion. Section 3. Self-assessment. Rate your confidence level, 1 to 5 scale, in the following competency areas. Patient assessment and diagnosis. 3. Confident in standard cases, increasingly uncertain when patients present with experiences that blur boundaries between delusion and documentation of actual impossible events. Treatment planning. 3. Can develop appropriate treatment plans for conventional presentations. Less confident when treatment requires acknowledging that patients' delusional claims may be accurate observations of reality's misbehavior. Professional development. 2. Uncertain whether I'm developing into competent psychiatrist or accumulating trauma that will eventually require my own extended psychiatric treatment. Ethical reasoning. 2. Struggling to maintain ethical boundaries when the ethical frameworks were designed for reality that functions more consistently than what I'm actually encountering. Again, pre-filled responses. Again, disturbingly accurate self-assessment I hadn't consciously formulated, but recognized as true the moment I read it. Section 4. Critical incidents. Describe any significant events requiring intervention, ethical consultation, or supervisory support. The text filled itself. Incident 1. Discovered my badge accessing secure unit during hours I was documented sleeping elsewhere. Security footage showed aged versions of myself entering the ward, suggesting temporal displacement or consciousness fragmentation. No intervention available. Phenomenon continues. Incident 2. Patient presented with my identification badge issued 10 years in the future claimed to be my supervisor from timeline I haven't reached. Unable to determine if patient was delusional or if I'm experiencing discontinuous temporal existence. No supervisory framework available for this scenario. Incident 3. Found myself conducting group therapy sessions without conscious awareness. Voice facilitating independently of intentional thought. Represents possible dissociative episode or emergence of autonomous professional function. Ongoing concern. Incident 4. Patients in research study began recalling my memories as their own, suggesting pharmaceutical breakdown of consciousness boundaries. Discovered my name listed in study's control group despite no memory of enrolling. Identity integrity compromised. The list continued. 12 incidents, each one a documented case from my actual experiences during the quarter. Described with clinical precision I hadn't achieved in my private notes. Someone had documented my year with perfect accuracy. Someone had been observing my experiences, cataloging the anomalies, assessing my psychological response to accumulated impossibilities. Someone was evaluating me with more thorough knowledge of my cases than I possessed myself. Section 5. Goals for next quarter. Describe specific objectives for continued professional development. Goal 1. Determine whether I'm psychiatrist experiencing unusual patient presentations or psychiatric patient experiencing elaborate delusional system involving residency training. Goal 2. Assess whether the phenomena I'm documenting represent actual reality deviations or my own progressive reality testing failure. Goal 3. Decide whether to complete residency training or acknowledge that I may need psychiatric treatment for trauma accumulated during training itself. Goal 4. Accept that some questions won't be answered before graduation, and that practicing psychiatry with fundamental uncertainty about nature of consciousness may be unavoidable professional condition. I stared at the screen. These goals were mine. I'd thought them privately during countless 3 a.m. moments of doubt, but never articulated them so clearly. Seeing them written in official evaluation format made them real, undeniable, a documented acknowledgement that my training had veered far outside standard residency experience. Section 6. Supervisor comments. The field was blank, cursor blinking, waiting for input. But I was completing self-evaluation. Supervisor comments would be added later by my attending after I submitted the form. As I watched, text began appearing letter by letter, typed by invisible hand. Dr. Calloway has demonstrated exceptional resilience during a quarter that presented clinical challenges not anticipated by standard curriculum. Her ability to maintain patient care responsibilities while experiencing reality deviations speaks to strong professional commitment. However, concern exists regarding her long-term sustainability in this field. The cases she's encountered, temporal anomalies, consciousness boundary failures, phenomena suggesting reality itself functions differently than medical model assumes, would destabilize most clinicians. Recommendation: continue training with increased supervisory support. Monitor for signs of cumulative trauma. Acknowledge that we're training her for field that may not actually exist. That the psychiatry we teach and the psychiatry she'll practice may be entirely different disciplines operating in adjacent but non-overlapping realities. She's learning to be a psychiatrist in a world where consciousness doesn't follow the rules our textbooks describe. That's either the most valuable clinical training possible or a prolonged descent into shared delusion that will require extensive treatment to overcome. I'm not certain which. The text stopped. Supervisor comments complete, though no supervisor had written them. Section 7. Attestation and signature. I certify that the information provided in this evaluation is accurate and complete to the best of my knowledge. Below the statement, my signature, my actual handwriting scanned and placed digitally, already present on the form. Dated and timed, December 12th, 8:43 p.m. I checked my computer's clock, December 12th, 8:42 p.m. The form had been signed 1 minute in the future. I scrolled to the bottom, looking for the evaluator identification field, the section where my supervising attending would enter their name, acknowledging they'd reviewed and approved the evaluation. The field showed evaluator, still in rotation, not a name, not credentials. Just the phrase, still in rotation, as though the evaluator was someone still in the process of becoming, still completing their own training, still learning the same impossible lessons I was documenting. I clicked submit. The form vanished, replaced by a confirmation message. Evaluation received. Your quarterly assessment has been forwarded to appropriate faculty. You will receive feedback within 2 weeks. Note, some evaluations conclude before they begin. Others continue long after residency ends. Yours appears to be the latter type. 2 weeks later, I received official evaluation feedback via email. The attached document was identical to the form I'd submitted. Same pre-filled responses, same supervisor comments, same signature dated 1 minute into future. But at the bottom, a new section had appeared. Faculty review comments. Dr. Calloway's evaluation has been reviewed by the Residency Training Committee. Her documented experiences align with a training pattern we've observed but rarely discuss. Residents who encounter the field's actual conditions rather than its theoretical framework. Psychiatry, as taught, assumes consciousness operates within predictable parameters. Dr. Calloway is learning that consciousness operates outside those parameters more often than our curriculum acknowledges. She will complete residency successfully. She will become a competent ethical psychiatrist. But she will practice a different psychiatry than we trained her for. One that acknowledges what we've carefully excluded from official teaching. Patients who remember futures. Reflections that observe independently. Consciousness that fragments across time and between individuals. Rooms that remain occupied after death. This is not the psychiatry of textbooks and board examinations. This is the psychiatry of actual practice encountered by those who look closely enough to see what we've agreed to ignore. Dr. Calloway is still in rotation, so are we all, rotating through versions of this field that never quite solidify into the discipline we thought we were teaching, learning, or practicing. Evaluation status, ongoing. I completed residency in June, graduated with appropriate certification, passed all board examinations, received positive faculty recommendations. But quarterly evaluations still appear in my email, forms pre-filled with details of my current clinical work, supervisor comments written by someone who observes my practice with impossible accuracy. Attestation signatures dated minutes into future. Evaluator, still in rotation. I'm an attending psychiatrist now. I supervise my own residents. But I'm still completing quarterly evaluations documenting the ongoing training that apparently never ends. The residency that extends past graduation into permanent rotation through a field that refuses to stabilize into knowable discipline. My residents ask sometimes, when does training end? When do we stop being supervised? I show them my latest quarterly evaluation, the form that appeared this morning pre-filled with my current cases, signed by my future self, evaluated by someone still in rotation. Training doesn't end, I tell them. We just rotate into different positions within the same ongoing evaluation. Some of us are residents, some attending, some supervisors. But we're all still being assessed by something we haven't fully identified yet. They look at me with the same expression I gave Dr. Brennan during my training. Confusion mixed with suspicion that the senior clinician might be experiencing burnout-induced philosophical digression. Eventually they'll understand. Eventually they'll receive their own quarterly evaluations with pre-filled responses and future-dated signatures. Eventually they'll discover the evaluator's name, still in rotation, and they'll realize psychiatry isn't a field you complete. It's a rotation that continues indefinitely, evaluating and being evaluated by the phenomena we thought we were trained to treat but turned out to be training us all along.